This week on the Frame Savers, 16 gigantic megs of compound fractures.
Welcome to the Frame Savers. If you're new to this podcast, we are a retro video game podcast that focuses on speedrunning. Speedrunning is a hobby where we try to beat video games as quickly as possible using whatever tricks, glitches, and strategies we have available to us. And this is episode 83. We're excited to be talking about a game that I love and grew up with as a kid, Streets of Rage 2, our first full episode on a beat 'em up. So we're going to also be covering a bit of just the beat 'em up genre in general. And also, we are live here on twitch.tv/theframesavers. So shout outs to the chat. You are looking at our faces. We are live on the internet. You can see these words happening live in front of you. It's unbelievable. So thank you all for hanging out so much.
Technology, man.
Yeah. Before we dive into the podcast, though, Chad, how are you doing, buddy? You went to TwitchCon.
I did go to TwitchCon. I went to that annual location with all the Twitch people. It was a lot of fun. I said after last TwitchCon that I wasn't sure whether or not I would want to go back. It's definitely more geared toward variety streamers and hashtag content creators, but they're starting to flesh out a lot of their offerings that appeal more to speedrunners. Definitely GDQX being there made it a more welcoming environment. I was on a panel, so I did a panel on integrating speedrunning content as a variety streamer, trying to offer something that appealed to that crowd. And then the Warp World booth was there for the entire weekend, and they had the hot place to hang out. So I was there, sipping the tea and sitting on the couch in grandma's basement, playing video games all weekend. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you got to hang out with the Warp World guys. As we announced previously, we have joined the Warp World Podcast Network, so you can check them out at podcast.warp.world. It was really cool to see. They had a really cool booth set up there, and they were showing off crowd control, which is what was previously bit races, where you can donate and affect the gameplay of games like Link to the Past Randomizer or an SMW Randomizer. So there was a bunch of showcases for that, which were fun to see, including Chad here doing some SMW. But go check them out at podcast.warp.world, and also check out, crowd control. It's a cool plugin you can add to your stream and try it out with your chat. But I've been playing some Parasite Eve, actually. I learned the whole game, bud. I learned all the days. So I think hopefully maybe tonight will be my first ever full run through. There's a lot to remember, a lot of notes and stuff, but the episode kind of inspired me to maybe learn some at least casual speedruns of it. Be able to
inspired's a good word. I was about to say infected, but inspired, that's a good word too.
Ooh, infected. Well, my mitochondria were driving me to speedrun this game, so they're taking over. But I'm excited about that, and I missed you here at TwitchCon. There was no Author Blue streams. Very sad. Very sad.
Yeah, it can be tough.
We're also joined here by LRock. What's up, my dude? No beat 'em up enthusiast. So how have you been? What have you been playing?
Oh, lots of things. Aside from the beat 'em up theme we've got, I have been playing a lot of spoopy games for the month of October, as I've done for my second year in a row. This month, I played a couple for the first time ever. I played King of Dragons Maiju for the Super Famicom for the first time. Game's incredible. I know Arthur there has played it before. I don't know if
that game's a ton of fun.
It's a spooky game on the SNES?
Oh, dude, your family gets kidnapped by demons. Yes.
I've never even heard of it.
It's super good. It's Japan only release.
Yeah, I was about to say it's Japanese only. It's like Majinju, or I don't remember the Japanese name.
Maiju. Like Majyu.
Yeah, but it's a really cool game. It's sort of like a run and gun style almost, with these big, larger than life bosses. It's a really, really cool game.
Yeah, and Blonde, it's fairly difficult. In fact, more so than a game like a standard Castlevania would be, but not quite like Ghouls and Ghosts or anything like that.
Right.
But it's very, very fun. It's well worth a look. What else have I played this month? I played Silent Hill 2 for the first time since college, just because I wanted to see if the game holds up. An amazing game. It might be in my opinion, the best survival horror game ever made. The game's
incredible. Wow, that's high praise.
It's very good. Like Resident Evil 2 is one of my favorite games ever, period. But for that genre of perfection, I think Silent Hill 2 is just unbeatable, especially with like the way the story crafts and how you can actually craft the story for the character because it has like 5 or 6 different endings. You get to basically determine his end. It's like a choose your own adventure game. It's pretty wild. And on the beat 'em up front, since SGDQ, one of my primary focuses recently is to get back more into arcade titles, and I've actually been leaning a bit more away from speedruns and doing a lot of what's called 1CCs, or also known as 1 credit clear or 1 credit completion. Just trying to work my way around the multitude of beat 'em ups that are available for arcade and see which ones that I can actually feel like I can get better at, and hopefully while getting good at one, be able to adapt my skills from that to another. Just branch out from there. This month for Halloween, the one I learned was this was going to sound so silly. This is not to be confused with the Super NES and Genesis title that everybody knows and hates. It's the Batman Forever arcade title from Acclaim.
Yeah.
The arcade version is it's definitely not a bad game, but it's definitely a really, really crazy one. The game has an absurd amount of tech, but it's also one of the most random games I've ever played. Enemies have random damage values. A guy can punch you and it can just kill you.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Think about trying to play a game like that and trying to like complete it on 1 credit, which is 3 lives in that game.
For sure.
Like, I'm doing well. Random shoulder block. I'm dead. Okay. I guess I have to reset.
We're super excited to have LRock here because he is kind of the main beat 'em up guy in the community, so we are excited to have him kind of be able to bring some insight into that. It's kind of an underrated part of the speedrunning community. It doesn't get discussed as much as platformers and others, so we're real excited to dive into that. If you are looking for spooky content, speaking of that past month, I did a lot of spooky content as well, but our podcast, this is the first episode we've done outside of October, but if you want to go back, we did 3 pockets and 2 full episodes all on spooky stuff. So if you missed out, or this is airing live online right at the end of October, tomorrow's Halloween, maybe you want a little Halloween podcast for your day, go check that out.
Boy, we also got some month.
Yeah, it's been cool. I mean, Oth's been sleeping with the light on all
31 days.
I can't handle it.
It was really the Ghostbusters 2 game. It was. He couldn't sleep.
It was spicy. I still see Slimer when I close my eyes.
Yeah.
See that room he's in right now and how bright it is. He brought that with him to TwitchCon just to make sure he wouldn't have to go to bed.
Completely. Some cool upcoming events we got going on. Tiny 10 8 will be November 10th, 2018. If you're listening to this live right now, that's a few weeks, but if you hear the recording, it's only in a few days. On twitch.tv/speedgaming, that's going to be 10 different Game Boy games run as a marathon race, and there's some pretty cool titles in there, so check that out. We're really excited about that. Also, DreamHack Atlanta 2018 is November 16th. That's on twitch.tv/no reset marathon. And what is that again, Chad?
So that is a convention, but at the convention, DreamHack has started to put together some speedrunning events as well. So the previous ones that I'm aware of were the DreamHack that's in Canada. I don't remember which city it's in, but now DreamHack Atlanta has its own speedrunning event that's going on as well. And this channel right here, twitch.tv/no reset marathon, has been featuring a lot of the DreamHack content. So that's kind of your new home for the DreamHack speedrunning events.
Awesome. Also, just another announcement we had made recently, but if you check in the profile or the panels for the live Twitch stream, we are doing our merch again. So we relaunched our merch line, and you can go ahead and get those old shirts that a lot of you asked for. So check those out. But before we get in the episode, why are we talking about Streets of Rage 2? Why Streets of Rage 2, my dude?
Yeah, why Streets of Rage 2? John loves this game.
Me, isn't it? It's me always. Yeah. This has been the answer for the last 4 episodes. So
yeah, you can't pitch this one over to me. It's like, why talking about Streets of Rage? Well, I for one am very excited to talk more about beat 'em ups. They're not a genre that I particularly have a lot of interest in playing casually, but I also am very interested in the more obscure side of speedrunning things that don't necessarily get a lot of attention, seeing what people are doing out there, even without necessarily the glaring eye of the public on them. Anyone can speedrun a Mario game because everyone's playing the Mario games, but it takes a special person to sort of hunt down a game in a genre that you really love and play it just for the joy of playing it. So I'm very interested in talking about beat 'em ups for that reason.
Absolutely. This is a genre kind of along with shmups that just doesn't really get a lot of attention in speedrunning compared to platforming, action, adventure, and the like. So we're excited to cover that. We should probably do a shmup episode down the road too. Really cool genres that a lot of people maybe just don't give enough credence to or love to. Also, I grew up with this game. I was lucky enough to have an NES and a Genesis, and so the Genesis, this was one of my 2 or 3 favorite games on it. Loved it growing up, played it a ton, and I've been wanting to talk about it for a long time, so I'm really excited about that. But I think before we dive into Streets of Rage, it'd probably be best to have a discussion on just beat 'em ups in general. So we're gonna go ahead and take a quick music break and then dive into the history of beat 'em ups.
So before we jump directly into Streets of Rage 2, one of the purposes of this episode is we really wanted to be able to talk about a variety of different beat 'em ups. So as speedruns, beat 'em ups have a lot in common with each other. They are similar in a lot of ways and different in a lot of ways. And so this episode is meant not just to focus on Streets of Rage. Streets of Rage is sort of our vehicle for discussing beat 'em ups, but in addition to that, we wanted to talk a little bit about beat 'em ups in general. So a little bit about the history of beat 'em ups for those of you who are maybe not familiar. So there's a long history of games that definitely serve to lay the foundation for beat 'em ups as we know them today. But the one that's definitely credited for being the first beat 'em up that fits maybe the current iteration of what we consider to be a true beat 'em up is Renegade for the NES in 1986. And this is really the first one that featured a lot of the common features that are known across different beat 'em ups. Things like enemies taking multiple hits to be killed, being able to move around freely in 4 directions of movement, often with a jumping ability that sort of adds a third dimension as well. Movesets are often limited to punches, kicks, and throws, maybe with the occasional thing that can be picked up. So you can find power-ups throughout the level that maybe increase your health, maybe increase some sort of energy bar, and in addition to that, you can pick up weapons. And Renegade, being the first one in the genre, actually sort of lives in an interesting place itself. It's actually the first entry in what is referred to as the Kunio-kun series. And you may have heard of that term before. The Kunio-kun series includes a lot of games that ended up being Japan only, but some of the ones that ended up in America as well are games like Super Dodgeball, River City Ransom, and Nintendo World Cup.
Love Kunio-kun games. Love them.
I
grew up with Nintendo World Cup, and River City Ransom was one of the best beat 'em ups on the NES. Super Dodge. They just made like weird, quirky games. They came out with a recent River City Ransom sequel on the 3DS and stuff. But yeah, they have the unique chibi sprites, and they're just always being a little bit creative and fun. Like Nintendo World Cup has that like Blades of Steel quality to it, where it's like you can kind of like more arcade and cartoony than like realistic, and there's always fun games.
For sure. Yeah, they all. Really? If you've ever seen one of them, they all look relatively familiar in terms of the art that's used in those games. So the characters in Super Dodgeball actually look very similar to the characters in River City Ransom and Nintendo World Cup. And they actually went on post NES to make a ton of soccer games and other sports games on the Super Famicom and the Mega Drive in Japan. Now, while Renegade was the first commercial success was definitely Double Dragon. That was the biggest success out the gate, and it was designed by a man named Yoshihisa Kishimoto, who developed Renegade as well, and is actually considered to be the grandfather of the genre. So even though Double Dragon and Renegade weren't made by the same team, Yoshihisa Kishimoto actually worked on both of these games, and it's one of the reasons why they share so much in common. But Renegade actually ends up pretty often being downplayed, doesn't get quite as much credit for where it exists in that space.
I feel like a lot of people haven't even heard of it.
Right.
It's actually kind of amazing.
I think people think of Double Dragon before they're going to think of Renegade for sure. Double Dragon was kind of the first more popular beat 'em up.
For sure.
Yeah, Renegade was on arcades as well. Double Dragon was on arcades, and actually a lot of these games ended up being on the arcades. The coin-op system was really perfect for games of this variety because you can just feed it quarters to get more lives as you ran out of lives. So it was very common for these games to be started on console, play out on console, and eventually be ported to home systems, often with some limitations to the platform. So some games ended up being very difficult to translate. Going from arcade to home console was very difficult. It was difficult to produce the same style of game. And so they were completely remade. Games like Strider, the game that we know to be Strider on NES, bears pretty much no resemblance to the arcade version of Strider. Bionic Commando is almost an entirely different game than its arcade predecessor. But
Are you saying my Game Boy copy of Double Dragon is not the same as the one I would have played in the arcade?
Actually, the Game Boy version of Double Dragon, if I'm not mistaken, is actually a console port of a Kunio-kun game, but I can't remember which one specifically. It actually sort of bridged the gap, but I don't remember which game it was. I remembered reading it and being very surprised by it. But that being said, that being said, the limitations weren't purely on the side of the home consoles. Actually, the home consoles, once we moved into the 16-bit era with the Super Nintendo, had some features that they weren't quite able to reproduce easily on arcade machines. So for instance, in Turtles in Time, things like being able to throw enemies on the screen, which is famously used in that fight versus Shredder about midway through the game, that's not something that was on the original arcade version. And even in Neon Knight Riders, which is a level where you're sort of skateboarding across this futuristic world, in the arcade version, it's scrolling left to right, so it's very natural. It's exactly what you expect in an arcade game. They use the Mode 7 capabilities of the Super Nintendo in order to make it sort of feel like you're skateboarding forward toward a horizon. And so they really did capitalize on a lot of those really nice features that the Super Nintendo afforded them. And this is really, at this point, this is where we transition into Streets of Rage 2. This is where that game really appeared. There were a lot more. I mean, if we were talking about an episode about just the history of beat-em-ups in general, there were a lot of games long into the future, a lot of beat-em-ups that sort of had a lot of different features, games that don't even feel like beat-em-ups but owe a lot of their creation, owe a lot of their features to the influence of beat-em-ups. But at this point, this is where Streets of Rage really jumps in. So I'll let John jump in here.
Yeah, and just to speak, there's a lot of features that I guess are common to beat-em-ups that we might want to discuss, just like what makes a game a beat-em-up. So it's generally that enemies take multiple hits to kill, with generally melee attacks being like the primary type of attack. You're not a running gun shooter. You're not, doing that. And I think also a big differentiator is that the combat is the focus of the game. It's not platforming or exploration at all. So like I was just thinking, a game like The Flash for Game Boy that you talked about at one point is like multiple punches and kicks to kill enemies, but the focus of the game is really platforming and finding your way to the right point and jumping over gaps and such. So generally beat 'em ups don't have a bunch of pits for you to fall into or items you need to go explore and find, puzzles. It's focused on that action. Usually you have 4 directions of movement, so you can go like up and down on the screen, kind of the 2.5D of what we think of when we reference that, with jumping giving something like 3 dimensions, so it's like pseudo 3-dimensional. Right. And then move sets are often limited to punches, kicks, and throws. And then the items that you find on the ground can be used, but they're not like the primary like weapon. You're not playing a ninja game where you're using a sword the whole way or anything like that. So I think like the fact that the power-ups, like the weapons, are temporary is a big part of beat 'em ups.
Right.
Because you're not, I think a lot of other action-based games are focused on the weapon you're carrying. There's
Contra, you pick up the machine gun and you can carry it for as long as you want to if that's what you prefer. But in beat 'em ups, your main move set is the idea, and it's just a brief respite from that you occasionally get weapons that do something special.
Yeah, it's those melee attacks, and it's kind of a little branch off of the fighting genre, which was also popular in the arcades. But these aren't as complex of fights, but you're getting in a multitude of fights.
Some games do famously sort of break with these conventions. So beat 'em ups typically tend to be very linear. It's just a straight progression through a level. A game like for instance, River City Ransom breaks with that because there is a sense of exploration. There is some platforming built into it. It is truly at its core a beat 'em up, but it's a beat 'em up plus.
I would say a big key to it being different than a fighting game is also that there's multiple enemies on screen at once. You're not doing one-on-one combat, then moving to the next section doing one-on-one combat. Generally, there's waves of enemies coming in, and you're kind of mowing them down, which I think differentiates. And these were really popular in the arcades. I know when I was growing up. I mean, I know the Simpsons arcade game was by far my favorite arcade game to play, which is a beat 'em up, which is one I know LRock here has 1CC'd, I think, with all the characters.
Played that a time or two. Yeah, I've divulged a bit in that game.
Yeah, that was one of the ones I played a lot growing up, and also the Die Hard arcade game, which I don't know if
that game is so fun.
I have that on PS1.
It's such a mess, but it's so fun.
I feel like it has really mixed reviews. Some people are just like, "Wow, that game is really terrible," and some people are like, "I love that game." But
I loved that game.
That is one that I absolutely loved as a kid. I always, anytime I would see it in an arcade, I would see if I could do it, how far I could get on one credit. I never paid more than one credit, but I always see how far I could get on just one.
Yeah, it was like that, fighting games, and then like the shooters like Area 51 and stuff where you're pointing on the screen. Those were like the games that I grew up playing in the arcade. And so, like, back when arcades were, you'd go to the mall and there was a arcade that you could go to and play. Like that was my favorite part of going to the mall when my family had to go there. Now you don't get that anymore, unfortunately. It's sad. But this is kind of the history behind where we're at with Streets of Rage 2. There had been a lot of games on the 8-bit consoles, and I think the genre really developed pretty significantly in that period of time, from games like Renegade and Double Dragon 1, and then you're getting to this period of time with Streets of Rage 2 and Turtles in Time and these different beat 'em ups. They really were kind of hitting their stride in terms of finding the ability to take that arcade experience and get it to a console properly. Streets of Rage 2 itself was released in December of 1992 in North America, and then in 93 in Japan and Europe. And its platforms where it came out on the arcade, also on the Genesis, and then was ported over to the Game Gear and the Sega Master System. Also, there was it was released on PlayStation Network, Xbox Live. Sega actually recently released a 3D Streets of Rage 2 made specifically for the 3DS that you can get, and it has just some new features. So there's something called Rage Relay, where every death you can switch between characters as opposed to having to wait between continues, and you like determine the order of the characters you want to use ahead of time. And then there's a casual mode where enemies, once they're knocked to the ground, they're dead, including bosses. So like much quicker and easier than the standard game, as it gets a decent bit difficult. And in general, the game was developed by a big like ad hoc group of developers. Actually, it was Sega in collaboration with Ancient, Shout Design Works, M&M Software, and HIC. I don't know why they needed 5 companies. I'm never seen that before, but it was published by Sega. Yeah, I mean, they had a lot of people working on this apparently, and it worked out for them. And it was published by Sega, and in Japan, it's called Bare Knuckle 2: The Requiem of the Deadly Battle, which is a way cool name for a game, I feel like. I mean, that's just like, I know it's a lot of words. It's like, you have an English minor if you've read that title, but like, it's still a pretty cool name.
Yeah, I saw the logo for it, and I was just like, wow, that sure is a mouthful.
Yeah, it makes it sound like a lot more is going on plot-wise than is really going on in the game. Like, that's more the game gives you going on. But and this was Sega's response to Capcom's Final Fight series, so they wanted to kind of compete with Capcom. Capcom was having a lot of success, especially in the arcade, with their Final Fight series, and so Sega just decided to develop this beat 'em up.
I never played the
know,
Final Fight series.
genre.
I
Me
mean,
neither.
As I recall, Capcom was exclusive to Nintendo at the time, and I think that was just Sega's response, like, "Oh, if they're gonna have that, we're just gonna do our own thing." And as John said, it became very, very successful. Is what
I
it
mean, that
is.
makes sense. We've seen a lot of games that did exactly that. You know, the Aladdin, Capcom had the license for Disney games in for the Super Nintendo, and so Virgin just said, "Well, we want to make an Aladdin game, and we can because Capcom's only allowed to release this on Super Nintendo." So
Could be also why they got Vector Man instead of Mega Man. Who knows?
Maybe. I mean, they did eventually get Mega Man games, but.
Sure,
Yeah.
they got the Wily Wars, and some Capcom games slipped through the cracks. They got the first, I think, console home version of Ghouls and Ghosts, for example, was on the Genesis. But yeah,
So-
very, very few slipped through the cracks as it was.
So we got to respect the lore. I feel like we're big here
Respect
on the
the
frame
lore.
savers. We're big proponents of respecting the lore. That's one of our core values. I think it's in our mission statement, is it not?
Oh my god, there's a lot of lore here. I'm just scrolling through the lore right now.
Yeah.
This is, oh my god, this is like
This is what
Lord of
happens
the
when
Rings.
I do the notes.
This is
what happens
Lord
when
of the
I do
Rings.
Yeah, so this is the second of the Streets of Rage series. It's widely considered the best in the series, and some people even call this the best beat 'em up ever made. So that's pretty high praise for this. So this series was very successful. With Streets of Rage 1, here's the lore. A crime syndicate has taken over a once peaceful city. That's not good, including parts of the police. And Adam Hunger, who's a boxer, Axel Stone, a martial artist, and Blaze Fielding, a judo expert. They're young ex-police officers. They've quit the force to fight back against the syndicate, which is led by Mr. X. And this has alternate endings. One thing that's really cool is that if you play it on 2-player, at the end, you get this offer from Mr. X to join his crime syndicate. And if you both say yes, the game ends. If you both say no, you fight him and get the normal ending. But if one of you says yes and one says no, you have to fight each other. So you actually do like a one-on-one against each other to, I guess, decide. It's kind of like rock, scissors, paper, right?
That's
Are we
some
going to
pretty
join them or not?
impressive lore.
Yeah, so
Very
that's really
impressive.
cool. And so Streets of Rage 2 came out as a year has passed in the lore since Streets of Rage 1. Adam, Axel, and Blaze are at a night spot. They're reminiscing on their victories. They've defeated Mr. X and just feeling good, you know.
Unless you said yes in the previous game.
Yeah, well, that's not the canon lore though. That's
Okay,
just
sorry,
like,
that's not
you know,
canon.
yeah, it seems that's not where they took the plot. But I don't know why this detail is given, but Axel and Blaze, they've moved out of the city. I guess they're married in love. I don't know. Blaze is teaching dance lessons, you know, teaching some rumba maybe. I don't know. Axel's a part-time bodyguard. You couldn't even get full-time bodyguard work, so I kind
Who
of feel
wants
bad
to be a
for him.
full-time bodyguard when you could be a
don't know.
part-time bodyguard?
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe he's got a lot saved. I don't want to judge his, you know, where he's at socioeconomically, but Adam has rejoined the police force and he lives with his little brother Eddie Skate Hunter. And then I guess Max is just an ex-pro wrestler and he's just Axel's friend. I don't know. But anyways, Mr. X kidnaps Adam. So Adam was a playable character in Streets of Rage 1.
Such a
He's
trope.
kidnapped in this, and you have to go save him and also stop crime because crime's bad, right?
I love that the lore is literally all of these people have these fully fleshed out backstories, and Max is here too.
Yeah, I actually had to look it up somewhere else because one of the places just didn't even mention why he was in it. Like, didn't even give credence to his existence in the game. And then Streets of Rage 3, all three of these came out on the Genesis. Mr. X started a research company called RoboPsyCorp, which you know is going to be evil. You just know. If Mr. X is running RoboPsyCorp, you know something's going on. Well,
I prefer to think it's pronounced Rabasi.
Rabasi. Okay, well, we can go with that. But they replace all these world leaders or all these government officials with robots because that happens. And Mr. X can control them with a remote control. And so Dr. Zane, I don't even know who that is. They're just like, hey, Dr. Zane discovers that this research is really about taking over, you know, the government and stuff. And they have these robots. And so Axel, Blades, and Skate go to help because I guess Adam decides he's back in the police force. He just doesn't. He's too busy to help out. That's what it says. He's too busy. And this has 4 endings depending on difficulty and time, which is pretty cool.
You know what I really hate about these cyberpunk games from this era is that Doctor is always a sign of them being the bad guy. And I hate that so much.
Well, Dr. Zane's a good guy in this.
It doesn't feel good. When I see a guy with Doctor in front of his name, it's like
Dr. Wily, Dr. Light.
Am I gonna have to punch you eventually? Am I gonna have to punch this guy? It's hard to be an academic out here when Doctor almost almost
Sure.
always means that you're the bad guy.
Dr. Clamp in Parasite Eve, we just talked about, didn't end up being a very good guy. So
He was not an ideal role model.
he also caught on fire, so you probably don't want that associated with your name either. So
Well, I'm a
might
good
wanna
enough
shed the
doctor not
doctor.
to set myself on fire.
yeah, well, that's fair. So why no sequels? Well, like Streets of Rage 3 was a lot of the same as Streets of Rage 2 and wasn't very well received. And so I think that was a big part of why Streets of Rage 4 was never made, but there were a lot of attempts to make a sequel to this. So, it was a popular series. They wanted to move it to 3D. When the Saturn was coming out, Sega purchased a half-completed game called Judgment Force and wanted to turn it into Streets of Rage 3D with a whole new team, starting a whole new lore
That is
of new people.
That is such a Sega thing to do. Like, we bought this
Yeah.
half-complete game. We do not plan to finish it, but we will change the name.
Yeah. And so that did not come out. Spoilers, author blues. Geesh. It didn't get released. Last minute, they pulled the plug. It actually became Fighting Force. Dreamcast, they tried to make it. They went on. They were going to make a Streets of Rage 4. The game was eventually canceled. There's been a number of attempts since then. I could go through a whole list, but they tried to do it for the Xbox. They tried to do it for PlayStation. And just it's every time they've announced stuff, it's fallen through. I mean, there's been screenshots and a little bit of gameplay seen here or there, like for the last 20 years, but it's just never come to fruition. Apparently, though, August 2018, so just a few months ago, Streets of Rage 4 was announced again. The developers are going to be Lizard Cube and Guard Crush Games, and the publishers Emu, who actually published Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap, which we talked about here on the podcast a few months ago. So apparently, a Streets of Rage 4 is on its way. So I mean, we've heard it before. You never know. It might be another switcheroo, but it's gonna be interesting.
We heard your demands, so we are going to release a HD remaster of Streets of Rage 2.
Yeah, with the same levels. That's probably you never know. Do you know anything about this, LRock? Or
Only what I've seen in the trailer. I don't think I have any other information anybody else hasn't already seen. Very impressive trailer, I must say. But aside from that, like I really don't have. I just know.
What's in the trailer?
Very little gameplay, unfortunately. There was a cinematic featuring both Axel and Blaze. Axel, the only one looking actually different. He has a beard now, which I was like, okay, I guess he's older, so cool. But it kind of reeks of that. There's got to be a trope for like when you want to buy a new action figure just because he has like a new customizable part. Like he has a new beard, I have to have it.
Sure,
whatever.
I have to play with Axel because he has a beard now. Like
right. But other than that, gameplay wise. I haven't seen a whole lot that looked different. It looked slick. I'll give it that. Like it actually looks like it moves well. Like it has like HD sprites and moves at 60 FPS, and it looks reasonable. And I'm definitely going to be playing it.
That's cool.
So
it's also
that's
probably
kind of
released at the proper time too. Because I think a 3D release would have probably hurt the history of this game, but.
I don't know. There were some pretty cool like 3D beat 'em ups on the PlayStation 1. Like I think
those are hard to find though. What's funny is Sega is probably the only company I can think of that made some that are like somewhat historical now. Like the aforementioned Die Hard Arcade, Dynamite Cop was another one that's really fun. Not very common though. It was not a good transition.
It feels like transition to 3D should have been easier than it was. Like if you give free range of movements, then it sort of stops being a beat 'em up.
You kind of need those 4-directional limitations.
Right. And so like Die Hard Arcade, exactly like you mentioned, that they did it right. Like they constrained you to those same sort of lines, and so the game makes sense to control. But as soon as you remove that, as soon as you get sort of the ability to move around, now it's like, do we need a targeting system?
But it should have been easier to transition that than platforming, of all things, right? Like 3D platforming versus like beating people up. You're walking around beating people up. I mean, I don't know. I'm surprised that the beat 'em up genre wasn't stronger in the transition to 32-bit.
I think it's pretty close to a coin flip, but let's be real. When it comes to 3D platforming, it took like, major game movements to get people to even accept those. Like, Super Mario 64 is considered, one of the best games of all time, but it was because Nintendo was like, we're just going to push the envelope here. And nobody really did that with beat 'em ups.
No, they really didn't. So
and a lot of those successful follow-ups as platforms as well, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, games like that. But yeah, beat 'em ups, no company really paved that way. Like Konami and Capcom had already moved on to doing like survival horror fighting
Mhm.
games in the sense of, or in the case of Capcom, stealth in
Yeah.
the case of Konami.
Sure. Yeah,
Everybody
they
just
just
moved
you're
on.
right. They just went different directions. It's a good point. So Streets of Rage 2 is the game that I'm just gonna dive into real quick. This game has 8 stages. 6 of them are similar to Streets of Rage 1. They didn't really remake the levels completely. Like the game's very similar. But they added 2 new levels, one being the baseball fields that you go on and you take the elevator down. I don't remember which one's the other one. And so this game, the first one you could be Axel, Blaze, or Adam. And this one, Adam's kidnapped, so you can't be him, but it adds Max and Skate.
Mhm.
So you got Max, who's the big, strong, slow one. Axel's the more balanced one, and Skate's the really fast one. I don't know. Blaze's kind of benefit seems to be jump kicking. Like she kicks
Blaze
really well.
in the first game was supposed to be the fast character, but in the
Mhm.
second game, I think she's actually the most well-rounded. Like she kind of slotted into Axel's spot in a way,
Yeah.
whereas Axel was like, Axel's also slowish, not max walk speed slow, but
Mhm.
he kind of he reminds me more of Adam in the first game, and that he's a lot more grounded, and
He's more tech.
he can control the space in front of him. Whereas
Yeah.
Max is very much a powerhouse, but he's also not really what's I'm thinking of, conventional as a character.
Mhm.
Like you can compare him to Hagar from Final Fight, I suppose,
Right.
but Hagar can't move like Max can. But as
Yeah.
far as like the trope or the archetype, then yeah, it's probably just like the grappler.
Yeah, and so this game, it has your standard move sets. You've got kick and punch, but you also have a special attack ability. You can hit on A, and if you hit that, you'll usually do something that either helps you clear out a group of people around you if you get maybe caught in a hold or just are surrounded by enemies, but it sacrifices some of your health to do a special attack. And then the other attacks are kick and punch and jump.
It's kind of interesting because most beat 'em ups I've played before have a true, what's sometimes referred to as desperation attack.
Yeah.
Which is just where
And
you're getting
extra joy.
Yeah, you get overwhelmed by enemies and it allows you to clear out the space around you very well, usually at the cost of a little bit of your own health just to activate the attack. And this game has a special attack, but it doesn't feel like a true desperation attack because it doesn't really like clear out the space around you. It's less defensive and more offensive. Which I don't know, just my limited experience with beat 'em ups feels like it's kind of unique in that way.
It's funny how iframes can coordinate both, right? Both offense and defense. Defense
Right.
being that, like, oh, I'd rather just not get hit by this. So I'll just sacrifice some health. Whereas offensively, it's like, oh, well, they can't do anything about this, so I'm just going to do it. That costs some health.
I would say it's definitely more defensive in this game. It's best used when you get surrounded by enemies or get put into a grab. And this game does have grabs. It's cool because there's a lot of different ways to attack. If you're in a grab from behind or in front, hitting the B button or the C button, I think both do different things. A different move for each character. So each character has, those. And then there's multiple combinations for that. Like if you grab somebody and hit B, you do one thing. If you grab someone, hit away from them and hit B, you do another thing. If you hold B and hit C, you hit behind you. So there's like a lot of diversity to the fighting and move sets, and that was something this was really complimented for. So from Streets of Rage 1, they added Max and Skate and remove Adam. They added much more diverse move sets like this to the game. And then also one really fun touch, which I always love, they add enemies. All the enemies have health bars of their own that you can see as you fight them, which is something I really like. You play a game like Double Dragon or the traditional beat 'em up, you don't know how many hits an enemy is going to take till they die. And each of them has their own name. And
that's always my
part.
favorite. That's always my favorite part is finding out the names for all the dumb enemies.
You're like, this guy's Gary. You're like, screw you, Gary. Like, yeah, like I hate this guy. And then you're like, I don't know, it's just funny. They have a lot of weird puns on people's names and stuff. Like there's a larger guy named Gourmand, and there's like one of them.
Gourmand's
another name
a
Buffet.
great use of wordplay for sure.
Yeah.
Gourmand and
Excellent use of
Buffet.
wordplay.
You name your kid Buffet, you're not a good parent. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't care what you did the rest of that kid's life. You named your kid Buffet. Like
We named it where we went for dinner.
Yeah, that
Great
was
night at the hospital there. Yeah.
But I think that's one thing that gives this game a lot of charm. Sure. And then also in terms of these special attacks, they did change that from Streets of Rage 1 as well, because it used to be all of the characters, if you hit a police car would pull up and like shoot a missile and it would like help as added fire. But no, in this game,
great speedrun strat.
Yeah.
That thing takes forever to set up.
Yeah, it's like a little cutscene plays, but this game, every single character has their own special attacks. They each, I believe, have 2 special attacks. Actually, you were saying, right, LRock?
Yep, they have a neutral A, which I think is the best to use for defense, and they have a direction plus A, which is usually forward A, so left or right plus A, and that's your primary offense. Like Skate, for example.
You're right. Skates
so I
is
know you're
really
a fan
good for
of.
defense.
His neutral is the breakdance, I think, which is incredible for defense because it goes under basically everything and it grants him iframes. Whereas his offensive, where he holds the direction, is a straight up jump into a dive kick that hits multiple times where he spins. That move's amazing. That move does absurd damage, especially good on bosses.
Yeah, like Max's neutral is he spins in place with his fists out in front of him, whereas his forward A is like this charge attack that can cover like half the screen, where he just does multiple damage to every single enemy he connects with.
He bulldozes everything in his path. He's basically a freight train if you do that move. I've watched the speedrun for that game multiple times, and it's crucial for fun to be able to know when you're going to be utilizing that because it's your best move. Movement because the walk speed in that game overall, even with someone like Skate, is kind of slow. So to give someone like Max that who's supposed to be slow to make him inherently faster than everybody else is just kind of disgusting. Like it's a bit unbalanced to say the least.
That's the other issue with beat 'em ups often is that the style of the genre is that the screen moves at a fixed speed and it'll lock into place when you get to a spot where it wants you to have an encounter. So even a character like, for instance, in this game, Max, which is conceivably the strongest but the slowest, as long as he can keep up with the speed that the camera moves, then he's just as fast as anyone else would be. Max has a slide kick that's not easy to execute.
Also very good.
It's not easy to execute if you're not in front of an enemy. Like, I couldn't figure out consistently how to do it when there weren't enemies around. But if he does that, you're easily moving faster than the camera is. So there's really no demands on
That's kind of more talking about speedrunning. In terms of casual playing, the speed's definitely really beneficial because you're not really caring about scrolling the screen faster like a speedrunner would. But avoiding attacks, and especially this game, like grabs are very important part of combat. So like enemies will grab you a lot, and that means that the other enemies are going to be able to crowd around you and such. So having that speed with someone like Skate, playing as a kid always as Skate was kind of like, I think, pretty analogous to playing as Princess Peach for SMB2. Like, I think it's easiest to play as Skate because he's just so much faster and all. It might be he hits for a lot less, etc. But I think like for a beginner, it would be a lot easier to play as Skate because of that movement and being able to avoid contact. But the game, I think the game was lauded because the way they balance these different characters, because there's so many pros and cons to all of them. So they added these more diverse movesets, but also they are really different gameplay experiences. If you have Max and you go up against a large boss, your ability to, not get grabbed or be able to grab them and throw them is a lot higher than if you're playing with a fast player like Skate. There's a lot of enemies. Like, a lot of the game is the enemy's ability to overpower your attack. So like you both attack each other at the same time and their attack wins. Say somebody's doing like the larger guys will do like a cannonball on top of you. If you're Skate, you're always going to get hit by that. If you're Max, you can actually like stand through that, take the hit, and then get a bunch of hits in. So there's such a diversity in gameplay between all the characters that I think that's a big reason why this was such a big step up for Streets of Rage 1 and also just for the genre in general. I don't know. You've played so many beat 'em ups, LRock. What do you think in terms of the diversity of player gameplay?
Prior to Streets of Rage 2, it's actually hard to disagree with that. Granted, I've played quite a few games up to this point where the movesets are just, like you said, they're just a completely different experience. Streets of Rage 2 is very much a pioneer for that. But prior to that, a lot of characters really didn't have that moveset diversity. They did later. Games like,
I mean, Double Dragon, they're like the same person, right? Like that was the norm back in the day. Like
there's no difference between Billy and Jimmy at all. There's a gameplay, not in any of the first, definitely not in the first two. I don't know. I haven't played enough to judge that, so I can't say so much there. But you get games later, like for example, the Konami game Violent Storm is similar to how Final Fight plays, even though it's a Konami title as opposed to a Capcom title. Though that game has a list of characters with diverse movesets. Same with Capcom's game Battle Circuit, which actually through the game incorporates a money system that allows you to upgrade your moves. I thought was really cool, and they're actually like fighting game style inputs.
Yeah.
Right. And so prior to that, but Streets of Rage 2, like you said, it pioneered quite a bit of that to my experience.
I think it is really
before that.
I think it's really analogous to SMB2 actually. Like it really is. Like all four characters have really define strengths and weaknesses where they actually are all worth playing. Like I think a lot of games when they do, it always ends up there's one.
I'd argue Mario. Mario sucks.
Well, sure, but I think there's a lot of these types of games, like it really comes down to like, okay, this one player's just broken. Like they didn't program it well enough to be balanced. They tried to, but ultimately one player just super shines out. Outside of the speed run for this, like I think that, you know, you can argue, oh, this one character shines, but as a casual playthrough, I think you see the benefits of each player, which is really nice.
I feel that, and a lot of what they used to do, and even this is looking back through my own personal history, is a lot of games in this genre would always have one character that would generally be considered to be the best, but they were also supposed to be the most difficult to play correctly. They were considered the expert character.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see a lot of that as much these days. I mean, granted, there are some characters that are going to be inherently more difficult to play than others, but there's also, like you said, a lot more balance. Whereas, like, the example I always use for, you know, you always play this character and no one else is Turtles in Time for the SNES, which as much as I love that game, it doesn't have the character diversity that Streets of Rage 2 does. Raphael is clearly the best. Like, it's not even close that he's actually the best. He's the fastest character. He has the highest damage output. And the movesets between the four characters really aren't all that different. It's just that Raph does the most damage, so of course you're going to play him.
Well, casually, Raph is a big challenge as well. I think a lot of people didn't prefer to play Raph casually is because Raphael takes the most damage and he has a relatively shorter range compared to someone like Leonardo and his bow staff. So there is still some character diversity there.
Bow staff?
Yeah,
Donatello.
Thank you. Donatello's bow staff. Like you end up with some character diversity in terms of how you might play it casually, even though Raphael ends up being the obvious case for the speedrun, as is the case with a lot of speedruns. When you have characters, some are weak, but they, you know, that take more damage, but they run faster. You know, you're gonna take that sacrifice. You're gonna run that risk to move faster, and that's exactly what Raph does. Raph outputs the most damage out of anyone, but he also takes the most damage out of anyone, and so he's very dangerous to play casually.
His health is terrible. You're not wrong. He has basically the durability of a wet paper bag. He can take like 4 hits before he loses a life. It's pretty rough. Yeah. And yeah, I played him, I think, less than any character growing up, but I still messed around with him just because when you're running at people, it was just the amount of enemies you could just plow through was just so significant that I wasn't able to overlook that. It was just like, wow, this is amazing. I feel like a blade cutting through butter. But then, yeah, you get hit in a casual run. It's just like, well, that's unfortunate. I might have to continue now.
I should have known Oth was going to turn this into a Turtles in Time discussion when we're talking about Streets of Rage 2.
No, I did that. I was very careful
Guilty.
not to mention. I was very careful not to mention too much Turtles in Time stuff because I'm still banking on doing a Turtles in Time episode eventually.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. This game was received universally good acclaim. Like it got really good reviews, most of them over 90% for a lot of publications. GamePro gave it a perfect score and called it the side-scrolling Street Fighter to beat. GameFan said the best fighting game and the best side-scrolling fighter they ever played, which is, I think, pretty good. Retro Gamer magazine in 2004 actually voted the 64th best retro game of all time and included it in their top 10 Genesis list. And it's often listed as one of the best Genesis games that's ever been released. It's one of the more beloved series from this time. And so it got great reviews. I mean, you can go look it up and find reviews everywhere. It's up there with, you know, Turtles of Time and as kind of the two best beat 'em ups, I'd say, from this era probably. And the series, you know, it's a bummer the series didn't, you know, have any legs past the Genesis. It was kind of quickly in and out, but it was really, really strong when it came out. Before we move on, though,
it could have been worse though. It could have ended up being like Turtles in Time, where, I mean, what good has Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games done since then?
It's been a hot minute. It's been a hot minute. The good Ninja Turtles beat 'em up came out, and by that I mean it was Turtles in Time, and then that was it, right? And they're always trying for the same style too. They're trying to do it again.
Any Turtles video game. It's like there's nothing.
Okay, so we got my John Carl's section real quick before we're done. Our new section, John Carl's Picking of Nits, sponsored by LaCroix. LaCroix? You call it LaCroix or LaCroix?
LaCroix.
LaCroix.
You just call it LaCroix?
It's LaCroix.
Okay. Can we get a sponsorship from LaCroix? Because I drink a lot of it, and
We'll call their people and we'll see what we can do.
Let's tentatively sponsor this Picking of Nits, sponsored by LaCroix here. Here's my question. Here's my nitpick here. So the first game, Mr. X, crime, people dying, bad stuff, right? You don't want crime in the streets. That's usually a negative thing. They find Mr. X and they kill him, or they beat him up. What happens between that and then he's just like back doing it again? Do you just like say, oh, I think he's probably dead, and then like nobody arrests him, nothing, nobody check? Like, how does this situation come up? Because it happens twice in a row.
John, like, what did they do with Dr. Wily or Bowser? Like,
Dr. Wily always at least runs off the screen, right?
okay, all right, that's fair.
In
What
Mega
about
Man
Bowser?
3, he got crushed by a rock. Come on now.
I had
He
to
didn't
stretch
die
on
from
this
that.
picking of nits. I had
Okay.
to. Okay,
That
the other
Okay.
real nitpick I had was just that Adam decides to he's like, I'm gonna sit out Streets of Rage 3. Like he's kidnapped
Adam
in 2. He's kidnapped in 2, so it's like, okay, that makes sense plot wise. He's not it, but 3, it's like,
Our boy needed
sit
a
this one out.
vacation. Okay, if you
Yeah.
get kidnapped, you're probably not showing up to work the next day.
yeah, I guess that's a bad event. I don't know. Do you have any picks? Any nits to pick? Picks to nit?
Streets of Rage 2?
I think if you have 4 players in a game, you should flesh out all of their backstories. We've got the 3 best friends in the world, and Max is here too.
That's a good one. That's a good one. So let's go ahead and take a quick break. Listen to some amazing Streets of Rage music that we're going to talk about in just a second. So each and every week, we like to do our little rating section here where we can kind of review the game as a casual experience before we discuss it as a speed run. And we cover different topics and discuss them, such as graphics, music and sound, controls and gameplay, difficulty and fairness, fun and replayability. Try and give it a score from 0 to 10, 0.5 being the lowest we've given and 10 being the highest, using that whole scale. And before we hop into that, though, like, what do you all would you say makes a good beat 'em up?
I mean, I kind of want to
first?
I want LRock to lead this one because he's had a
You've
lot of
played
experience.
a lot
with them.
more beat 'em ups than we have, and most of the ones I've played are on Game Boy, to be honest. So
That's funny because I don't think I played a single Game Boy beat 'em up. Well, I played Double Dragon, but
makes sense.
only for a little bit. I need to fix that. So what makes a good beat 'em up? For me, the things I like, assuming the game has more character, plenty of games that I enjoy in this genre that only have one playable character, but we won't get into that now. To me, if you have multiple characters, you need to have good character balance because you have to have that replayability factor. If I've done everything I can with one character, I want to come back and do it again with the next, just to see if it feels any different. And Streets of Rage 2 is a perfect example of that. Like Axel plays differently from Skate, he plays differently from Blaze, etc. Diversity
On
in
top
enemies.
of that, if they can do alternate endings for each character, that's also a nice little bonus to that. I feel like as well.
Yeah, that'd be a heck of a memory grab. I don't think I've ever seen that to beat 'em up, but yeah, that would be
Really?
kinda cool. I'm not to my knowledge. I'm thinking about it.
One of
but,
these games at least has different cutscenes at the end, like different. They have the Streets of Rage games when you're seeing the credit kind of have these screenshots that are like pictures of what was going on, and at least one of them has different ones per each character. But I mean, the
Different
ending itself might not
dialogue.
be. Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
What else? Let's see. Good character balance. I mentioned a good variety of enemies. You can't just fight the same thing over and over again. Like monotony is the easiest way to just get shut off to it. Just like no, if I fight the exact same wave of 7 guys and 3 adjacent screens, I'm not going to want to play this anymore. Got to keep things fresh. Good sense of control, and that obviously comes down to like how well the game's programmed for one thing. In addition to that, when I mentioned character balance earlier, movesets are a very, very big deal for that. We've come a long way from what we've had in games like Renegade and Double Dragon that only have so much to offer in that regard. You have 3 buttons and not much to do with them. Actually, does Double Dragon Arcade even have 3? It might. Yeah, it does have jump, kick, punch. There we go. Good variable boss fights. Lots of boss fights that feel differently from each other. Good 8 to 10, I think, is about where it needs to be. That's actually one thing I have a knock against. Not Turtles in Time, but Hyperstone Heist. It's sister cousin for the Genesis. I love that game, but the boss fights are just so tedious because they all are exactly the same. It's the only thing that keeps that game from being great for me. Good level design, although there's only so much level design you can get out of, pseudo isometric movement.
I mean, I would
definitely the big ones.
Yeah, I would say it's really hard, and something that I look for in a beat 'em up is having fairness, like a nice balance. It's really hard to do because you can make a beat 'em up where it's really easy to just use the same combo on every single enemy and they die, and you kind of have these exploits where you realize, okay, well, if I just do this over and over again, all the bosses, whatever's going to die. And then on the other end, you can have beat 'em ups where you're constantly getting swarmed and overwhelmed, and it makes it just too difficult and feels, there's aspects of this as we get on like that feels really unfair because a lot of the enemies just attacks overbalance your attacks in Streets of Rage 2. It gets really hard with certain enemies. You got enemies that are flying that are really hard to hit that just have unfair advantages. You have enemies that constantly you're doing your attack and their attack just is stronger, they'll punch you out of it, and so it's really hard to get that balance between being, because difficulty feels even more out of your control in a beat 'em up. I guess like a platformer, it's a lot easier to have a type of balance where you feel like, okay, I died but it was my fault. But in beat 'em up, you've really got to struggle. Like I feel like it's really hard to make that balance.
You kind of have to put your nose to the axe.
Yeah, there's a smaller window of being overwhelmed and having your moves be able to get canceled out and not work as effectively versus it always working, and then you just do the same thing over and over again and it feels repetitive, like you said. So
I can't speak this way for every beat 'em up, but I can at least say this much in Street Rage 2. In Street Rage 2, there's never any given situation where you don't have the deal with what you're having to what could be overwhelming you. You always have an option no matter the situation. The struggle, as you pointed out, is also, as you pointed out, figuring out what option that is. That's where things get crazy. It's a big part of why I enjoy it so much. Sometimes you just really have to put yourself in these garbage situations to figure out what the heck you're supposed to do, not only this time but next time. And I'll test that kind of stuff over and over and over and over and over again. It's just what I enjoy. Like I enjoy being able to get into a scuffle and thinking, okay, is this going to work this time? And if it does, then I'm going to do it again.
Yeah, I think another thing that makes a really good beat 'em up is the music and graphics, for sure, which are our first two categories.
Soundtrack goes a long way.
You're when you're doing kind of a little bit more of repetitive gameplay, like you would in a beat 'em up or an RPG, you want those good tunes keeping you going. And what do you think, Chad, of the graphics and the music for this?
Well, the graphics in this game are really sharp. There's a lot of really gorgeous scenery, set pieces. I mean, and that's what you're really asking for, is since every level is more or less just a straight path left to right with like the occasional diagonal movement or something that breaks up the linearity. In general, it's all about the background art, which I think beat 'em ups can get away with a lot of crap for that. I think beat 'em ups really only have to draw a few really gorgeous looking backgrounds, and then it's like, all right, well, you've got a whole game right there. But I think that this game does knock it out of the park, and like everyone said over and over, as far as the sound's concerned, the soundtrack is just full of bangers.
Speaking of out of the park, I really like the level design for the baseball stadium. Big fan. I think that's I don't know. The settings in this game are fun. Like, it's not taking itself too seriously. You're not always just like going through like these dark streets or whatever. And like the characters, like their sprites are silly and fun as well. Like it's just it's got a bit of charm to it in terms of its graphics. I feel like with having so many unique enemies and some of them being a little sillier than others. But
you can also tell they had a lot of fun with the memes, like the arcade machines or the bare knuckle games.
Oh, yeah.
Look at those. Yep. And in stage 4, when you're approaching the baseball stadium, the signs outside of the park say "Do baseball," which makes no sense, but it's a great meme for the game. Do ! Exclamation point baseball.
It makes more sense than no Beavis, no what is it? No vibes.
No Beavis, no vibes.
Yeah, makes more sense than that. I feel like personally. In terms of the music and sound, this is composed by Yuzo Koshiro. He used the then outdated NEC PC 8801. I think that's a computer, a hardware, something. But he actually
like a
used
soundboard.
Yeah, he used his own audio programming language to make this game, which is really cool. You can read about that. It's some sort of variation on BASIC. But he was heavily influenced by EDM, and this soundtrack was considered revolutionary and ahead of its time for its blend of swaggering house synths, dirty electro funk, and trancy electronic textures that would feel as comfortable in a nightclub as a video game. That's what Games Radar said in 2010.
Oh my god. They said that in 2010, and that's like the most 2010 thing I've ever read. Swaggering house synths, dirty electro funk.
They're like, it's like dubstep kind of, right? That's what
how Euro can we be?
Yeah.
With this comment.
But EGM called Koshiro just about universally the most gifted composer currently working in the video game field. That's a pretty good high praise for the dude. And he did
a lot of work. He did so much stretching for what the Genesis audio could be.
Yeah, the game is very influenced by EDM for sure. It's got a lot of really cool like electro funk, like it says, like there's a little bit of jazz funk element to it, and it's such a good soundtrack that people buy it on vinyl and stuff. It's like very lauded as like one of the best video game soundtracks of all time. And I don't disagree. I think it's so good. Like it's the best part of this game for sure. What do you think, Chad?
Yeah, I loved the soundtrack. I was pulling music down for this episode, and I downloaded the whole soundtrack for this episode because it's like there's no bad songs in it. Even some of the little jingles, some of the really simple stuff like the game over tune. It's just perfect.
The stage clear, so good.
Yeah, all of the music in this game is really fantastic, and they all set a really good theme separately. So it is this sort of futuristic cyberpunk kind of thing it's got going on, and all the music really plays into that really well. The music feels really different than the typical kind of music that you hear from a video game. I don't know how to exactly articulate what makes it different, but it feels like it's more likely to be a real soundtrack of some sort than it is to be a video game soundtrack.
Yeah, and I think it's just influenced by genres that aren't generally seen in a lot of video game soundtracks. Like I think the funk sounds and stuff, I guess the Genesis did that a bit with like Toe Jam and Earl and stuff, but for the most part, like this jazz nightclub funk vibe to all of the music that's fairly unique. I think most of video game music's more influenced by rock and pop, and so just to kind of have a little bit of a different genre feels good, and just the way it's written just sounds great. I think a lot of Genesis soundtracks I don't like. I think a lot of developers and composers didn't know how to utilize the sound chip well, and made a lot of bad music, like a lot of farty sounds and stuff. And
I have to imagine it was hard because you're exactly right. There's so many Genesis soundtracks. They're like, what were you thinking? Like the Super Nintendo did not have all across the board perfect soundtracks.
No,
but it felt like
the
worst. It felt like the worst of them were way better than the worst of the Genesis, and I don't understand how we ended up there. Is I guess my big point.
I think it really just tends towards a certain type of music, and I think that kind of people say like, oh, that farty tone or whatever, like if you know how to use that for the right, like these genres, EDM, funk, and stuff are heavy on bass, a lot of bass line stuff like that. And so like if they didn't know how to take advantage of that, if you tried to code it in the same way, I guess like if you tried to compose it as you would for an NES or SNES, it just comes through terribly. Like if you just ported music from the SNES to the Genesis, it would sound terrible.
Bad.
You have to write it
so bad
to that sound chip and its strengths, and especially that like bass tone and kind of the weird effects, and most people just did not do it well. And so it's even better to see Yuzo Koshiro just knock this out of the park. I think you're right, a lot more consistent soundtracks on the SNES than on this, and so for him to be able to use that sound chip to its full advantage, and even like have his own audio programming language and stuff for this, he's just kind of a legend. Controls and gameplay, I think we spoke about this probably enough at length in terms of just the diversity of the players and how it works, but do you guys have anything you'd have to say? I mean, I think it controls really well. I think it's frustrating some of the characters are a little bit too slow, but that's the trade-off you get for them.
Pretty spotless in terms of how well you're able to actually like utilize your character. I agree. It's pretty amazing.
It's a beat 'em up. It controls the way beat 'em ups do. You know,
Yeah.
you make the choice to play a slow character, then deal with it. You're playing a slow character, but I at least feel like all of my inputs happened the way that I intended for them to do. I guess the one downside is that you have to play with the Genesis controller.
That's a good point. Like actual controls, like the controller should be part of the category.
I call it
and
like
every Genesis game gets 5 points off.
As a recent convert to really start to appreciate Genesis games, I will still say I don't wish the Genesis controller on my worst enemy.
Yeah, so that has to go against it. In terms of difficulty and fairness, I think this game's pretty hard. I mean, I played on normal, but once you get to level 5, level 6, it gets really difficult, and you only have a couple of continues. So, I mean, me and Brian Morgenthaler, our producer, got to play it on stream. It was a lot of fun, and we did 2 attempts to play through. One of them we got to level 7, one we got to level 8. But it's just really hard. I think it's a lot harder 2-player as well, because there's what do they call it when you can hurt your own
friendly fire.
Friendly fire, and that's
yep.
First of all, I know you're listening to this, Brian Morgenthaler. You hit me with a lot of punches. You hit me with a lot of punches. There's a lot of times where I felt like you might have been on the other team, but that can make it really hard to.
Traitor.
Yeah, that can make it really hard to beat. So I think it's harder 2-player, but in general, it does get a lot harder. Bosses that you face in the first couple stages start becoming like regularly occurring enemies, and it starts giving you a large volume of these enemies flowing in on you, and you know, I think it's a good level of difficulty. I mean, I beat it as a kid. I played it all the time. So I think it's fair, but it's definitely not a breeze on even on normal, I would say.
For sure.
It has I think it has a good scaling curve to it personally. One of the better games for that. But it, like you said, around the 5th, 6th stage, yeah, that's when it starts to I shouldn't say to peak, but that's when it really starts to test your abilities.
This game really knows how to piss you off with some enemies, though. It really does. Like the second boss when you fight the guy with the, which I guess he was in the first game as well. He kind of a Freddy Krueger ripoff. He's got the like Wolverine claws.
Oh yeah, that guy.
Him, the boxer, our bear, any of the flying jet guys that just like swoop down and grab you. I mean, it can throw some enemies at you that you're just like, every time I see this, I get angry. And then at the end of the game, it starts being like, what's it like to fight 5 of those at the same time? So
at least compared to some of the beat 'em ups that I've played in the past, I will say one thing that this game does have going for it is that it seems to have the right length. 8 levels is it seems like it hits a sweet spot. I remember I've never beaten Knights of the Round to this day, because that game just keeps going.
Hard. that game's really hard.
But it keeps going. Like, even when you get better, you discover that getting better means getting to level 12 or 13, and you discover, oh, this game's got like 16 levels. Like, when does it end? And
yeah, I think you want a really nice, like, you don't want a 7-hour beat 'em up, right? I mean, like, you want a good, nice hour and a half probably play through.
I mean, Turtles in Time is like 10 levels. This game's like 8 levels. Knights of the Round was like 15 levels.
You're gonna get tired of beating them up.
I know.
You don't want to beat them up anymore.
I eventually stopped wanting to beat them up and was considering just talking it out.
Yeah, and that's not a lesson we want to teach our kids at all.
Absolutely not.
So, in terms of fun and replayability, like LRock said, the big thing for replayability for a beat 'em up is having different experiences with all 4 players, and as we highlighted, this game does that really well. Outside of that, it's really tough to do much in terms of replayability for beat 'em up. There are games that do, you know, alternate endings. As I said, Streets of Rage 3 did this, where it implemented different endings based on how quickly you beat it and stuff like that. So, like certain stages. So, you can do some of that. But this game has a decent bit of replayability, I would say, based on the balance of characters. Anything else to add to that, I guess?
Yeah, I would say that...
and difficulty levels as well, sorry. So
yeah, so if you're a lover of beat 'em ups, the reason why you would love beat 'em ups is just because of the enjoyment of combat. I mean, it's a naturally, as a genre, is naturally quite repetitive, and I will say that I think this is one of the few genres out there where a change in difficulty level is enough to make a truly different experience. Having normal grunts throughout the level be able to grab you and throw you now in a higher difficulty level, I mean, that changes the game entirely. And then add into that having 4 different characters to choose from, different benefits for playing the games at different speeds, finding different items throughout the game, any sort of limitations in addition to those things you might want to impose upon yourself. I'd say that if you already enjoy beat 'em ups, this game is about as replayable as it's gonna get. Like
That's a good point, because if you do, easy, normal, hard for like a platformer, and it's, oh, this enemy takes one extra hit, whatever, it doesn't really change the experience as much as a beat 'em up, where if you're increasing these enemies, either numbers wise, quantity wise, or like you said, they're able to throw you now, or their strength's bigger. It does make a much different play experience. I think also, just in terms of fun, beat 'em ups are one of the best 2-player genres out there for sure. I mean, that's
unquestionably
why they worked well in the arcade, and that it was fun to have Brian over, my buddy, and our producer, and be able to sit down and play video games with him. I have a lot of.
There was the X-Men kit that was 6 players. I mean, that was unheard of at the time.
Yeah, they had that at GDQ.
But like, it just scales so naturally. Just all it is you got more enemies out there, or maybe some of them take more hits, and now you can put 6 people on the screen.
I think for me and you, I think we both appreciate that it's hard to find 2-player retro games to play.
Oh yeah.
And beat 'em ups are just the one genre that works for that. And it's a nice genre as well, because it's not hard to explain to your friend that came over, right? Like, if I'm playing FIFA with a friend, it's going to take me like 45 minutes to tell him what all the buttons do and stuff like that, and what the point is. And, if I sit down with a friend and play a beat 'em up, it's pretty obvious what you need to do, right? You walk up to the first enemy, you beat him up, you're like, I guess I'm beating him up. So
plus, if you teach someone how to play FIFA, at the end of it, even after you teach it to them, you have to play FIFA. So
wow, shots fired.
There's that.
But I mean, that's why it works in the arcade. I mean, anybody of any skill level can play a beat 'em up and enjoy it, and I think that's a lot of fun.
That one earned finger guns. I'm doing finger guns. I'm sorry. that was good. I got you on that one.
So, any last thoughts before we do this 0 to 10?
I think everything was pretty well covered. I know I had something I wanted to comment on playability. In terms of like character balance, something I missed earlier. What I like is that in terms of like the character diversity, while any given character can do one thing better than all the other characters do, because that's how balance works. Every character has to be able to do something better. Except for your jack of all trades character, your balanced character, as it were. There's not one character that does everything better than another character, and that always drives me crazy when that happens. Like, why make a character that has no purpose? Like, why would you have this? It's like a Final Fight guy the original Final Fight for the arcade guy is like completely worthless just because Cody does everything he does better. So like, why?
That's the problem with Knights of the Round, is that Percival is the slowest character, and so they thought, well, he's not going to be able to keep up with the other one, so let's give him a dash. Right? So now he's the fastest character and the strongest character, and it's like, well, why would you pick anyone else?
Yeah, he's busted in that game for sure.
So then you're forced to go back and play as a player that is you're not getting anything beneficial for the choice to beat it this second time. It's almost like a difficulty setting at that point. You're saying, okay, I'm just increasing the difficulty for myself. I don't get any new gameplay experience of, oh, well, he's really good with grabs, so now this gameplay I'm gonna do a lot more grappling than I'm gonna do jump kicks or whatever. So what would you give this from a 0 to 10, Chad, my man?
So I'm going to try not to let the fact that I don't really care for beat 'em ups all that much personally influence this, because I think that this is a great game outside of the fact that beat 'em ups just aren't really my genre. But I'd say that, I mean, this game is really up there. It's like maybe one of the best 16-bit examples of a beat 'em up. I mean, this is like a 7 or an 8 easily, especially for its time. I'm gonna go for 7, and that's only letting my bias against beat 'em ups influence it.
Okay, that's fair. What about you, LRock?
For me, personally, I'm always hesitant to be that guy and just give something 10 out of 10. Oh, I love this game, it's the best. Da, 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 da. Even like my favorite games ever, I nitpick to death based on their flaws, but it's more just a case of like, I love this game for its flaws. I don't call it perfect, but I love it for what it is. Streets of Rage 2 is not a bad example of that. On a day when I'm playing something that I might prefer a little bit more, I'm willing to go as low as an 8, but I am willing to go as high as a 9. So I'll rest at like an 8.5 to 9 or so. My only ever real nitpick with this is, and this was even the case when I was like younger, I'm not crazy about the sprite size. I tend to, since I played so much at arcades growing up, I tend to prefer like the bigger style size sprites on screen. And Streets of Rage 2, like the sprites are kind of small. Even like Max, who's just a Goliath compared to everybody else, is like not really all that big. So that's a minor nitpick. It works well within the gameplay and the system that it's utilizing. But as far as what I'm looking at it's not a preference for me.
Okay.
So, but I'm still willing to go as high as a 9. It's a fantastic game, and for this genre, I can't think of much in terms of gameplay that it doesn't have to offer. It has everything.
Nice.
It's a great game.
You want to know what I give it?
10. Is that 10?
I don't know. I haven't counted them in a while, but I used to have 10, so I think it's 10. I mean, I think it's considered one of the best Genesis games of all time. It's considered one of the couple best beat 'em ups of all time. Top 5 best beat 'em ups of all time. If you're one of the best in your genre of all time, like to that level, how do you not get a 10?
Yeah. No,
if you're like, oh, this is the 3rd best platformer of all time, I give it an 8. No.
Sure.
So they did. I mean, I think this is a great game. I think the soundtrack absolutely is possibly the best video game soundtrack I've ever heard.
I can't name
it's in the
a
top
beat 'em up
10.
soundtrack I prefer. That's for sure. It's so good.
I mean, it's up there
good.
like that, Celeste, some Castlevania, some Mega Man. Like it's just bangers. It's bangers, and it's a unique soundtrack too, which I like quite a bit.
It's no Turtles in Time, but it's good.
Turtles in Time soundtrack's amazing.
So those are our ratings. I think all 3 of us strong recommend to play it.
Oh yeah, for
you
sure.
know, if you're not a big fan of beat 'em ups, I would say like at least give this and Turtles in Time a try, so you can have played the best, and then you can move on. This is that good that it's worth trying. Even if you're not a big fan of beat 'em ups. I think if I think when we recommend games, normally, and you say strong recommend, not recommend, you might not be into the genre. This is the one game. It's like me and RPGs. I said I'll play Final Fantasy 6. If it's not as good as Final Fantasy 6, I don't want to play it, and that's like an unreasonably high bar. I think this meets that bar for beat 'em ups.
Sure.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and take a quick break, listen to some of that bumpin' electro funk music, and then we can talk about the speed run. So as always, we want to go ahead and dive into the speedrun of the game we're talking about, and we're talking about Streets of Rage 2 here. Streets of Rage 2 has a lot of categories, because
Yes, it does.
first of all, it has a lot of difficulties. You can play it on very easy, normal, hard, and hardest mania.
I believe those are two
maybe?
separate. It goes hard,
Okay.
then hardest, and then
And
mania.
then mania.
Mania, and very easy, which is strange. You don't start with them.
So right there, we got 6 different little tabbies to hit on the top of your speedrun.com. And then you've got the platform being Virtual Console/emulator or Genesis. And then you have 4 characters you can play as: Max, Axel, Blaze, Skate, or 2-player. So the number of combinations of speedruns that can exist for this is a lot of them. So I don't really know where to start with that, but I think the default when you go to speedrun.com is normal with Max. Max is kind of the fastest character, I believe, due to a lot of different things. But you know, there's a lot of these leaderboards maybe have 2-3 people on it. You know, it depends on your kind of cup of tea, right? Which player you want to play with, which difficulty you want to play on. Do most people play on a certain difficulty?
The run on Speed Demo's
I believe-
Archive is normal. That's the only thing I know is that on Speed Demo's Archive, the category that they choose to feature is normal, and I imagine that's the default difficulty, right?
It is the default
It is.
difficulty, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely the most. If you're looking for like just most runs in a given category, normal, VC, and emulator is definitely that has the most entries. I think it's the only one that has double-digit entries for any given character.
Yeah.
Yeah, Max has quite a few. Axel has 10 different ones. Axel definitely looks like it's the one that's been most focused on, according to the leaderboard at least.
It's the simplest run, just because he's the simplest character in the game.
Sure, yeah,
Some
that makes
people
total
spend more
sense.
time with it.
Yeah, so there's a number of different categories, of course, but the tech, you know, divides amongst these 4 characters. We've talked a lot and at length so far about kind of these different move sets and strengths and weaknesses of each character in terms of casual play, but in terms of the speedrun tech, they all 4 have their own different advantages. So do you kind of want to speak to like what each of these advantages is? Like, what is Max's main speed tech when you're speedrunning as Max?
I mean, he's got that awesome slide. I think that's one of the big things we were talking about earlier. When you're running this game, you know, you choose a character that's faster and weaker, or slower and stronger. But one of the things that really makes Max shine, at least, is the fact that even though he's technically the slowest character, it doesn't end up actually hurting him in terms of the speedrun, because you can execute that slide attack to keep up with the screen pretty much constantly. So I think that does make a big difference. You get all the benefits of his really quick grabs, his really strong attacks, his desperation charge is pretty good. And then on top of that, you're not really limited with your mobility, because you can slide anywhere you want to.
Yeah. Also his attack where you're grappling, he does I don't know wrestling move name. Suplex. It's not a suplex. Is that a suplex?
It's just a jumping slam. They're talking about the one where he actually like gets in the air and just tosses him to the ground. Like it's not really a wrestling move. It's just I pick him up.
He does a lot of damage with that one move. I mean, to the point where it's like almost 1 full health bar for a boss to do that. So killing these bosses is a lot faster with Max, a lot easier to grab them as well, which is something that, you know, if you're playing a Skate, you're not going to be grabbing the boss and chucking him around. So Max also using that slide, like Chad said, to increase his movement, which is supposed to be his disadvantage. So Max is the fastest character, I believe, right?
But through no fault of his own, yeah, he doesn't have the best character because of the fact that he has 2 special moves that allow him extra mobility. One being the shoulder charge, and the other being the slide. It's like Alta said, he can always keep up with the camera. He's never going to be in a position where he can't get where he needs to be right away.
Yeah.
What about Axel?
In terms of the leaderboard, I mean, he's the fastest one on the leaderboard for pretty much any difficulty.
He's the most optimized character because of the kind of tools that are available to him. Not necessarily because it's been played the most, but because of what's available to the character. He's just basically able to do everything. And as John said, his damage output is just through the roof. It's insane. Between both those moves, as I mentioned before, slide as well as charge do a lot of damage. His throws do disgusting damage. He's really, really good at enemy grouping with his throws. Hitting one enemy means that you're probably just hitting like 3 or 4 of them that are ahead of you, even if you're just punching them, and you're probably killing them all.
Yeah,
which is also really big.
Yeah, being able to have that big
him is massively advantageous.
Yeah, that hurt box to hit crowds is
shoulder
nice.
reach is silly. He has like an 8-foot shoulder span. It's nuts.
That happens sometimes. No judging.
Ex-pro wrestlers. That's
So
how they
what
do.
about Axel? What does an Axel speedrun look like? What are we to take advantage of Axel's skill sets?
Lots and lots of grouping and lots of grand upper. Axel's only real downside in this game is that his mobility is by far the worst in the game. He doesn't have a move that moves him. He doesn't have like, you know, your shoulder or your slide that pushes you about halfway across the screen. Grand upper does give you some mobility, but it might as well be considered a move that only stands in front of him because it'll go not a large number of pixels in front of him. It's probably less than double digits in number of
But
pixels.
it does hit several times, right?
It hits 3 times.
Yeah.
Which
So the
makes
grand
his damage
upper, just
output
to
very
explain,
high.
is an uppercut that
It's a sliding
Axel
uppercut.
can do. It's a a double tap in the direction and do your punch button, and he will do this uppercut that will generally hit large groups of enemies all at once, and it'll hit them 3 times. So it's a really effective kind of stun locking feature, as well as you can kind of just crowd them into one area and keep doing the grand upper. And he goes grand upper, which helps you know that it's the grand upper.
He also has the benefit of not being limited by the screen either, because at least jumping is considerably faster than his walk speed, and his walk speed.
You jump a lot with Axel.
And his walk speed is actually looks to be slightly faster than the camera can move anyway, so you wouldn't really be at a disadvantage.
It's faster than Max, but the advantage with Max is you're not walking anywhere. You don't have to. Everything else is faster. Quick thing about Axel, this is just an Easter egg. He has a glitch with Grand Upper that can allow him to slide backwards. It's really, really hard to do. It's a small frame window where you go double tap the direction, so we'll say forward, and instead of pressing B right away, you press away and B at the same time. The timing is very strict, but I have definitely used that to anti-air some enemies. Enemies who are like just jumping at me, like I would slide back, whereas the slide forward would have gone underneath them. Very, very useful, but it's not easy to do in a pinch.
I think it's good that he jumps a lot because he has pretty small legs, I feel like, compared to his upper body. He's kind of skipping leg.
Yeah, but you're not doing the jump kick with him if you're jumping most of the time. You're using the knee. The knee is your combo starter.
I'm just saying, I think he skipped leg day. He needs to get those legs a little bit bigger.
He's trying.
The jeans, man. He's got nothing to show off.
Yeah. Do you do stun locking with him? Because when I was doing my casual, he was the easiest character to go ahead and like start a combo and then stop it and restart it over and over again to get an enemy in what you call an infinite. The community calls an infinite, but basically you get them stuck in a cycle where you're able to continue to do that combo until they're dead. I got to use that on a bunch of bosses when I was playing with Brian, and it made a huge advantage. Is that used in the speedrun at all with any of these characters?
Yeah, with Axel, you definitely utilize it on at least a few bosses. Some sections of enemies, but not quite as prominent. The only ones I recall Axel uses it on in terms of like standard enemies are the kickboxers, because those are some of his harder enemies. So a lot of his more advanced tactics just don't really work.
Yeah.
Like trying to get it with grand upper, they can actually just block it. Same thing with like the knee, but it's like punching is faster than most things they'll be able to do. You just have to be able to get in. But if you can connect, then yeah, you can land an infinite.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. It feels like certain enemies are designed against certain characters' strengths and weaknesses in this game.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I feel that way with Max whenever a knife enemy shows up. It's just annoying. Or the ninjas, those guys who actually will come out with swords.
Whereas, like, I played as Skate as a kid all the time, so I think, oh, these enemies are. But then when I played as Max the other day, I was like, oh, well, with Max, it's not that bad with this character, so kind of cool.
But in terms of the infinite or the stun lock or the rep, whatever you want to call it, I think it's a lot more prominent with Blaze. Max actually, I don't believe even has it, but he doesn't need it because he just kills him with one swing anyway. But with Blaze, it's a lot more prominent, particularly because the third hit of her string hits like 3 times. It's like a spinning elbow, but it can hit behind her, inside of her hitbox, and when it extends out past her hitbox. So using it for her is very, very good because of the fact that it hits so many times. Whereas Axel is just jab, 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 jab. Like it's purely repetition.
What about Blaze? What is the tech that you're going to be doing when you're playing as Blaze?
A lot of mobility. A lot of her forward B move is also very good. I think it was referred to by name in Street Rage 3 as Terra Shield. I don't think it had that name in the second one, but it's a forward moving flip that is invincible from the front, and much like the slide or the grand upper, it can take out multiple enemies in front of it. It's a really good comboable move. Other than that, you have, of course, I mentioned before, her infinite is quite solid. You also do a lot of strings into her forward A move, which I think is just the Kaikosho, is named from a move that Chun-Li ended up getting later in Street Fighter, where she presses her palms forward in like an energy burst type move. Looks like almost like a fireball. Does a lot of damage, and most of your strings in with that. It does take health to use it because it's an A button move, but you still end up seeing a lot of it. You just conserve how you end up getting health later. Other than that, you can do throw loops with her like you can do with any other characters on some bosses in the corner, things
She
like
has
that.
really
But
good
as far as
grabs too.
yeah,
Her
her
grabs connect really well, and she can get a throw out of them really easily. So, without having to move herself, which means that she can throw enemies into other enemies, things like that.
She's also just naturally faster than Axel. Like her walk speed feels fair. Like it's definitely like the most well-rounded in the game. She's not super fast like someone like Skate, but she's definitely not slow like someone like Axel is.
Right.
So while her standard buttons, like her just B normals, aren't all that great, it can lead to an infinite. But yeah, as far as like her forward mobility, just press on with a Terra Shield, and once you're in there, just finish them off from there. Do a couple hits, Kikosho, and they're probably gone because you're going to see a lot of. She actually has probably the most variety in her move list out of any of the 4 characters for what you see in a run.
Okay, so to the objectively best character in the game, my dude Skate.
Objectively best.
Eddie Skate. What am I doing when I'm speedrunning with Eddie Skate? Because if I ever speedrun this, it's gonna be with my dude Eddie Skate.
A lot. You are moving so much as Skate. Like that dude is just all over the battlefield. He creates himself a lot of setups, particularly for grabs, and he might actually be secretly the best throw character in the game. His throws don't do the most damage, but the fact that his movement is so quick in terms of how he can get around enemies, he can create a grab situation for himself very, very easily. You're not going to be hitting them as much with standard moves because let's face it, he's a kid. His reach is terrible. He's not going to be throwing jabs a whole lot like someone like Axel or Max would. On that same token, you also have his A moves are very, very good. He's got the break dance, which is really only used for defense, but his dive kick is one of the most oppressive moves I've seen, especially in boss fights because
it hits multiple times. Right? How many times does it hit?
It's a lot. It's like 5 or 6. And so for bosses that can block, it actually does chip damage, similar to how Max's charge works. In fact, the stage 3 boss for Max is one of my favorites to watch. The start of the fight, you just get right in his face, do shoulder charge, and he just blocks it and takes like 6 hits of chip damage, and he throws you, and then you just do it again, and he's dead. It's weird how that works. I watched it today. I was like, that's possible.
Yeah.
How dive kick works similarly. It's a little bit more easy because of how the movement works. It's not very in your face. You have to have a lot of finesse with it, but it's still a move you end up seeing a lot. It takes health even if you whiff on it. But I mean, if you know how to adapt yourself to the run, then you're not going to be messing with it. You should be getting max damage out of it at all times. No pun.
So that's all of the different characters. In terms of the bosses, there's a lot of bosses in this game. We're obviously not going to break down every single one of them, but are there any bosses that stand out for any particular reason in the run with any of the particular characters?
I like the stage 3 boss quite a bit. I'll go with I actually learned some of the strats with Street.
Which one is the stage 3 boss?
I forget his name. It starts with a Z. Zemzo. He always reminds me of Blanca from Street Fighter because he has really long hair and he can do the
Gotcha.
Some people just refer to him as Blanca, but he has like a Z name. So you can create a loop on that boss where if you knock him down, choose your poison. You have ways. You can throw him. You can knock him down with like Max's shoulder charge. You don't do it with Max. You have a different strat there. Grand upper. What I did with Axel was when you knock him down, what you then do is then you jump or walk up onto where his sprite is getting up off the ground. And he's always going to wake up with a jumping uppercut, like a Street Fighter style dragon punch. You can jump away from that, and you're invincible to it. Like it just won't hit you. It's only programmed to hit you if you're on the ground. And then when you land, you just hit him with your attack of choice. With your Axel, I think you use Grand Upper because it just knocks him back down, and they can. I believe Blaze does a throw instead, but I can't remember for certain.
A lot of the bosses
that's definitely one of my favorites.
A lot of the bosses in this game seem to be mostly just sort of specific crowds. Like I feel like I was playing through quite a few of the levels, but a lot of the stages seem to end with specific crowds rather than one specific boss. It felt like either that or the boss didn't feel significant enough to stick out. Like for instance, there's actually it's the one that's happening in the video right now, I think, but you sort of walk outside and there's a fight that's happening in the rain, and like that guy on his own didn't seem to be all that challenging. Like he didn't stand out. Yeah, he didn't stand out on his own. It mostly just felt like it was a crowd boss almost.
I think they get a bit more defined as the game goes on. Like especially the later levels, you got like the 2 robots; those are very clearly
Right.
bosses. You've got the final boss, but you got like Bear. That's my least favorite boss, is the boxer.
The
in, like,
boxer, that guy sucks.
the One Piece 1920s bathing suit. I don't know what's going on there, but he is just impossible. And it might be because I like always play as Skate, and so Skate is probably like the worst character for him. But just in general, we were trying different characters and different things, and some of these bosses, that him and the guy with the claws, they can be really difficult. But like I said, those become regular enemies later too, so they don't stand out quite in the same way, like you said, as maybe a regular boss.
It's also level specific as to which ones get. I always refer to them as goons. Like, oh, this boss has goons that just show up with them, just a swath of enemies or whatever. I'm trying to remember how it specifically breaks down. Stage 6, for those that have reached it, actually features 2 bosses that you fought prior in the game. There's the guy with the claws and the guy with the jetpack.
Yeah, at the same
That's
time.
probably my least favorite boss fight in the game. He doesn't have much health, but the jetpack guy is just so annoying because there's no good attacks that actually hit him.
Because you're trying to beat the claw guy, who's like just flipping around the stage like the most mobility ever. And then the jet guy just keeps grabbing you and slamming you, and it's really hard to have an open window to hit the jet guy as is. But then when you also have the claw guy jumping around, it's chaotic. So that's what the game does a good job of, is as you get to level 5, 6, 7, 8, it just starts being like, well, could you beat all 8 bosses at the same time in the same room? And you're like, no, and then you die.
We prepared you for this.
Yeah, so
that's a boss fight I should talk about as stage 6.
Okay.
So I mentioned you fight the claw guy and the jetpack. You can glitch the game to where the first guy spawns, where the jetpack guy doesn't even spawn. And if you kill him before he ever spawns, then the fight's over. So you only end up having to fight one guy. It has to do with how far you walk onto the screen. You can just stop the camera and be like, I'm not going to go any further, because if I do, the other guy's going to show up, and then you just kill the first guy and the fight's over.
So that's mostly Streets of Rage speedrun tech. I mean, we could go into a little more depth, but I think that pretty much covers, bird's eye view of what it looks like. What about in terms of just routing beat 'em ups in general, and kind of tech you might see in a game? You just talked about despawning enemies, for example. That's not something that's very significant in Streets of Rage 2, but I think that's a pretty significant thing in most beat 'em up speedruns. Am I right?
It's so game dependent.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of just based on games that I've played. I can definitely say that a game we commented on earlier, Simpsons Arcade, doesn't really have a lot of enemy despawn. There are some areas where an enemy will very rarely just not spawn. Like you're supposed to only get say you're supposed to get 3 enemies in a section. Very rarely will it sometimes just be 2.
Okay.
Sometimes that happens, and it's great luck. But it's just it really, while it affects the run, it doesn't really affect the run. It doesn't affect how you approach the run. Just
but some speedruns, it's a big part of it, right? And like Turtles of Time, I think Trouble Dragon, where you actually have a bit of tech involved, where you are trying to scroll the screen in certain ways or certain places to actually keep enemies from spawning, and that adds up to a lot of speed time saved.
The start of stage 3, there's a chin you can spawn in the second section. Yeah, you have to knock him down past a certain pixel and then just immediately walk right. And because of the memory limitations in games like that game you can only have 2 enemies on screen at a time. The next enemy, there would be 3 in that section normally. The third one will just spawn, and the first one's just gone forever. So yeah, that's a big thing there as well. Streets of Rage, as you mentioned, I don't think there's quite as much of that. I haven't personally seen quite as much of that in terms of enemy despawns. If you're looking just for like other tech to understand in general, as we talked about boss fights, the big one for me is always enemy spawn points. Like, I always want to make sure I know where the enemies are going to be coming so I can kill them as fast as possible.
Is it usually fixed? Do most games have fixed spawn points, or is it random sometimes?
It's almost always fixed.
And you probably want to clear them on the right. Try and always be as far right as you can, right, when you clear them, so that you can start scrolling the screen immediately. You don't want to finish all your fights on the left side of the screen.
It's game dependent, but yes. I'll give you an example. The first beat 'em up I learned to speedrun was Batman Returns. Enemy spawn points in that game are crucial. Like, they always will spawn on the same point, and you always need to make sure you're there. And even in the last stage, about midway through the final stage, there are 3 sections back to back to back where the final enemy will always spawn on the left. And you pointed out, you want to make sure on the right. Sometimes the game doesn't allow that. Like, that one guy will always spawn on the left, and you have to respect that. So you just do it and just move. Just
if you
get out of there
picked
quick.
up a new game, you played through it, it was a beat 'em up, and you had a really good time, what would you be looking for when you kind of started the process of routing it for a speed run? So is it really focused on what characters do you choose, or are you looking for move sets? Are you looking for exploits with bosses? Like, what are you really looking for when you decide, how the routing process should play out?
Yeah, and I was gonna ask the same thing, but with the follow-up
Yes.
also, do you
The
break
answer is
down
yes to all
do you
those.
break down the like the attacks? Does that somebody like take the ROM attacks or something like that and break down the attacks, say, okay, this normal jab does 2 damage, this kick does 5, and break down like the time? Is it more of a feel thing with what Chad's talking about? Like when you're picking out which character to do, what move sets are gonna plow through things faster? Like how do you decide all that?
That's a hard thing to say. It really depends on the game. Obviously, for a game like Batman Returns, it doesn't matter because you only have one character. So I'll ignore that in terms of like these. You pointed out damage values. Obviously, you want to know what attacks you're going to be the most well utilized for a given section. I will focus on character choice, but I first want to know if I have the choice of character or if I know if a character is going to be just the actual best to use.
Mhm.
Sometimes that determines whether or not I'll even run a game. If the best character in a given game is one that I don't particularly enjoy playing, I probably won't play it. And that's actually a big one for me, Streets of Rage 2. I respect the fact that Max is the best character, but I don't particularly enjoy playing him. I'll point out that much exactly.
Sure.
Exploits I'm really big on. Those can be difficult to find. Despawn strats are obviously a very, very big one for that. That's purely an exploit. It's like, oh, well, we glitched the game where this enemy's just not going to be here anymore, so we're just going to move on. Strange that I almost feel hypocritical for even liking to find those because how much I enjoy combat in games like this, where it's like I just don't want to fight this enemy.
Yeah.
Is that hypocritical? Maybe. I really don't know.
You don't want to beat them up.
I just want them to vanish. Is that okay? Is that like maybe I should just be playing a platformer because there you don't have to worry about it. You just run past them all. It's hard to say. Let me take I could do a quick jog here quick and just go through the games I played. I'm not going to go through them one by one. I'm just going to try and get some inspiration. Sometimes there are exploitable glitches that I'll want with certain characters. For example, I ran Captain America the Genesis for a little while, and that game has been on several consoles. It was on the Super NES as well as originally on the arcade. And the Genesis version to me is the most fun because it's the only game where Captain America has a shield throw that hits twice. So obviously you're going to play him. It hits send and return. So your damage output is disgusting. You don't get to do that anywhere else. So I'll look for stuff like that. Boss fights that look enjoyable, I'll definitely be all about, at least in terms of like if I watch it and I feel like I can do it, then I'm going to probably try to attempt it. The move sets are very, very big for me. I want to feel like I have the ability to get in and out of a large majority of situations, which honestly makes me wonder how I picked up Double Dragon on the NES because that game is extremely limited, especially at the beginning.
Sure.
Nostalgia is a funny thing. I don't know. Everything that all said, like that whole list, all I'm thinking is just yes, 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 and more yes. Everything just adds up to where like this is all stuff that I want. None of it really surmounts past. To me, it's just if I think it looks enjoyable, I'll probably play it.
So when it comes to like seeing a new one that you want to try out, so you wanted to learn one, is it a big deal to sort of focus on like where do you start? I guess that's the hard part is we often try to tell people, this is where you would start if you wanted to learn this game. But there's a lot of nuance to beat 'em up speedruns. People might perceive beat 'em up speedruns as being easy because to speedrun it, you just play the game, right? You just got to get to the end. But like what is it that what is the process for learning? Do you start with figuring out enemy groupings? Do you start by figuring out moveset? Do you figure like where do you begin your process?
Part of me thinks it was different with every game. But it may not have been. Let's see. With Batman Returns, I definitely learned execution first because once I discovered there was an infinite, I decided I have to learn this first. This is going to be my highest damage output, so I'm going to learn that. For Simpsons Arcade, it was more about I already knew what was strong, so it was more just about like enemy spawns because in that game, enemies swarming you is not good. You don't have what Capcom calls a super joy to be able to just get enemies off you for costing yourself health. If you're getting swarmed, you're in a lot of trouble because that's how early Konami titles were. Same with like TMNT Arcade or X-Men Arcade. You just didn't have moves. Got them all off you. It didn't cost. That just cost like a little bit of a resource.
Sure.
Sometimes it was just nostalgia, but then again, if I don't speedrun my favorite game of all time, then maybe it's not always just. It's hard to say.
So it sounds like routing a beat 'em up is just like you're saying, similar to routing a platformer, where it just depends on the game. It's going to be maybe more obvious that certain moveset or certain finite or certain characters have strengths, and so that's how you begin the routing process, is kind of determining those strengths and weaknesses.
Well, that absolutely is what it is, and a lot of it is just about the feel of it. Like, a lot of people obviously felt very, very good when they first tried to learn to speedrun Super Mario World. I decided that run wasn't for me. Some people really enjoy it. It's just about like how it gravitates to you. You just put the put the controller in your hands and see if it feels good. Like, does it feel good to try to go fast? And if it does, then you just keep trying to go fast.
So if you were to recommend a beginner beat 'em up to speedrun, like if somebody wants to speedrun their first beat 'em up and they're looking for a good, fun, solid first beat 'em up to do, what would you recommend them?
Biased. If I'm completely biased here, I would actually say Simpsons Arcade is a great one. The Japanese version. It's not my actual answer. My actual answer, because it fits a lot of criteria. One, it's simple. You really don't have a whole lot that you can do in this game, but the few options you do have are not only really strong, but they're really easy to learn. Two, it actually features a lot of elements that I don't normally see so much in beat 'em ups, that being enemy manipulation. Like, you can only manipulate enemies to do so much in a beat 'em up just because their RNG is just immensely heavy. They just sometimes come on screen and do whatever the heck they want, and you can't predict it. You're going to take a swing. Oh, I'm just going to back up and hit you. Whereas the next time he'll just walk up and get hit in the face with whatever you're throwing at him. And three, since we're talking about speedruns, it's incredibly short.
Yeah.
And that is Golden Axe for the Genesis.
Ooh,
that actually is one of my high picks for if you want to learn a speedrun, beat 'em up as a speedrun. That's a good one to look into. It's really, really quick. The fastest character to play is a Tiris Flare. She's the female character. The top 6 or 7 runs on the speedrun.com leaderboard are all under 10 minutes. Wow. So for a beat 'em up, that's incredibly fast.
I loved Golden Axe growing up. Great game.
It's a classic for sure. It's also in tune with Future Rage because it's also developed by Sega. Much earlier title, but it was also one of the earliest titles that was based on the medieval period, as later documented in games like Knights of the Round, as Oth brought up, King of Dragons, the D&D beat 'em ups that were released by Capcom but never on a home console.
Yeah.
But it was one of the first to do that, along with I think Capcom's Magic Sword. But that game was a little bit different. Anyway, back to Golden Axe. A lot of enemy manipulation in that game works out to where enemies just end up suiciding, like they'll just fall off this. And not only is it advantageous to you in that it speeds up the game, but it's also hilarious to watch.
Yeah,
like enemies will straight just charge at you and you're just like sidestep.
Yeah, there's movement manipulation and stuff to get them to do that, which is makes it a pretty cool speed game. Definitely a little bit more interesting tech to add there. That last question actually about what you'd recommend as a beginner speedrun comes from Zelnus, by the way, and we're gonna go ahead and take a quick break, listen to some of that music, and then we're gonna answer the rest of your Q&A.
So, as usual, we like to take this opportunity to answer a few of your questions, and this week we've been very fortunate to get a ton of questions from you guys on our Discord channel. I'll remind you, as always, that our Discord has rooms for each and every episode coming up, so not just a great way to find out what episodes are coming up on the schedule, but in addition to that, also a great way to leave some questions for us in case you can't make the live shows. You can ask them there, and we will include them in our show notes, and that's where we've gotten the majority of the ones that are here right now. We may get a few more.
There's one open for next week. Bonk. Freaking Bonk. I gotta play Bonk. Go ahead, ask us questions about Bonk.
John's already mad about Bonk.
Very
All
mad
right.
about Bong.
All right, so our first question, which is neither really from Discord nor Twitch, it's actually from the podcast from a guy named John Carls. He says,
him.
Chad, why are you wrong about Turtles in Time being better than Streets of Rage 2?
Not touching this one.
I would answer this, but it's my question, so I can.
Well, it's also
Also
a
wasn't
question
asked to
for
you.
me. Yeah, it's my question. Great question. And since I have the floor, I will now present you my 15-minute essay on why Turtles in Time is objectively better than Streets of Rage 2. Thanks for coming to my TED. Yeah. No, I have a ton of nostalgia for Turtles in Time. As I've said a lot of times on this podcast, I had a Super Nintendo growing up, but I didn't own a ton of games. I had a neighbor who had Turtles in Time, and so we would often exchange the very small number of games that each of us had, and so I borrowed his copy of Turtles in Time. That's also how I played Mega Man X growing up. But I played a ton of Turtles in Time. It was a great multiplayer game, so when I would have my cousin come over or friends in the neighborhood come over, it was an obvious choice to play. I probably put more hours in this than I put in some of the games that I actually owned. I love Turtles in Time. Streets of Rage 2, though, I didn't get a huge opportunity to play it. I was off at TwitchCon, but I do actually want to play a little more of it because it does seem to be that good length. So I will say that I think that Streets of Rage has the potential to be just as good as Turtles in Time. I just think Turtles in Time, looking at it from the outside of what I know of Streets of Rage 2 and what I know of Turtles in Time has a lot of really creative elements to it that I think Streets of Rage 2 is like a really great cookie cutter, for lack of a better word, beat 'em up. Like, it fits the model of a beat 'em up. It is a great like entryway into a beat 'em up, and Turtles in Time does so many creative things in addition to those ideas. So I think part of that
making
is
turtles ninjas.
Yeah, and the
That
fact
was
that they
great.
can talk, which has never happened to me in my real life. I've never experienced a talking turtle. But things like being able to throw an enemy at the screen and having that, like, you know, you're viewing the fight from the perspective of the boss, just like they did in Battletoads. I think that that's a kind of a novel idea. Things like, you know, taking advantage of the Mode 7 engine, which, I mean, not a ton of games were actually doing, probably because not a ton of game makers knew how to use it.
I remember the first time I had to experience that boss fight. I was like, they didn't do this. They didn't actually do this, and they totally did. I was just kind of like, I was in shock.
It was such a creative idea because you experience as you're playing the game. Sometimes you'll throw an enemy and it'll throw them at the screen. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then you get to that boss fight and you're like, wait a second, the screen is where the boss is, and you discover that. Anyway, I don't think Turtles in Time is better. I like it more, but
honestly, if I grew up with Turtles in Time, I would like it better because I was a huge TMNT fan as a kid, like just huge. I actually just found all of my action figures recently. But and I played 1 and 2 on the NES all the time. I just happened to have not had this and had Streets of Rage 2 growing up. That's really the only reason. But I think they're clearly 2 of the best beat 'em ups of all time. And the next question coming from Mari Link is kind of a follow up on this, asking if we're going to cover Turtles in Time in this beat up episode. I mean, we did talk about it a decent bit.
We talked about it more than we probably should have for a Streets of Rage episode.
But I think we also would probably like to do a full episode on that game down the road. So that's why we're trying to focus on one game, but I could see us revisiting that for sure. Even though,
also, after the mention of Golden Axe, I think there's a real shot of having a Golden Axe episode down the road.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. Or Good Pocket or something.
I might have to learn that game now. Think about it. It's so short.
For sure.
At least push for sub 10.
So our friend Mo from the This Is Game Boy podcast asks, are you excited for the just announced Streets of Rage 4, which we talked about earlier in the episode? What do you expect to see from it, as the reveal trailer hasn't shown much in terms of gameplay?
Well, it couldn't be worse than the remake of River City Ransom, right? I mean,
that was a good game.
I heard really mixed things from a variety of people.
I mean, it was literally River City Ransom bigger. It was the same thing. It wasn't like it's not like, I think the expectations though are like, oh, 28, like this huge gameplay experience, but it's like, but you're also remaking River City Ransom, so what do you want us to do with that, right? Like you know, so I think that's a tough one. I probably would see it as being another 16-bit like inspired, like, you know, we've done a lot of these,
it's 2018
retro inspired games with Shantae and Wonder Boy and stuff. It's probably going to look a lot like a Genesis game, but nicer and be a beat 'em up. That's what I would expect.
I think that you could, I would like to see more actual atmospheric elements in terms of items in the stage that you can interact with that actually have to do with your surroundings, which is something that some beat 'em ups do a really good job with. I'd love to see more beat 'em ups take this idea of you can actually have maybe branching paths even, so you can have different stages that you experience different times.
Battletoads
Like,
did that. I mean, if you think about it, Battletoads is a platform.
You're
Kind of
absolutely
revolutionary, but there's like warps and stuff. I think didn't Double Dragon make a recent Double Dragon Neon or whatever?
Double Dragon 4, but you also had Double Dragon Neon, which came out back in, I think it was like 2010 is when that one was released.
I expect this would look just like those, right? Those like they're supposed to be 16-bit inspired beat 'em ups.
Streets of Rage 4, special. Streets of Rage 4 from a visual perspective definitely reminds me a lot of Double Dragon Neon. It doesn't quite have the same polish, I don't think, but it definitely has that same, like, we're trying to appeal specifically to this crowd that would have played.
All I'm saying is if it's
stuff like this.
If it's just an HD remaster, essentially nothing more than just a new coat of paint on the same idea, I'm not sure I see the appeal personally. But
I think it's really hard in 2018 to make a beat 'em up that would be different or unique in any way. You know what I mean? Like, we haven't had a game like that come out in a long time that's stood out. Like, a lot of these retro inspired games have mostly been platformers up to this point.
Make the end of every level force you to make a choice. You know, you can either go through the sewers or through a building, and that's a completely different set of levels. You get the whole Castlevania 3 feel, where it's like you ultimately end up joining back up with the same path, so the story's not different, but you get a different feel every time you play it if you want.
Like a little bloodstained kind of in there, where choosing if you kill the character or move on.
It would also make the speed run quite a bit more interesting for routing purposes. Like, which one goes faster? We don't know yet. How long does it take?
Every level with rock, scissors, paper, like Alex Kidd did on the Sega Master System. And if you die, you have to redo the whole level. Why not? That'd be a great change.
Oh, man. RNG for actually clearing a level seems amazing.
So,
amazing.
On Discord, Liz asks, the classic question is Streets of Rage versus Final Fight. As the Genesis Queen, you know where my loyalties lie, but do you prefer Streets of Rage over Final Fight or vice versa? How come? Also, this question was asked in chat by NL Video Games during this episode. What does everyone like better, Streets of Rage or Final Fight? People want to know about their Final Fight.
I think this is a question for LRock, because neither of us have played Final Fight.
I haven't played Final Fight.
Me? I hate this question so much.
I've watched a decent bit of Mighty Final Fight on DS, but that's a little different than the normal fight.
Oh, that game is awesome, though. Mighty Final Fight is such a cool game. It's actually one I spent a lot of time with Murph at SGDQ. I was like, dude,
that seems like a great game.
It's the speed run's very prickly. It has random enemy health, which is really messed up for a speed run.
That one's always a mess.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. Reset because every enemy had maxed out HP. Yeah, amazing. So what do I like best? So this one seems to come up a lot more now than what the aforementioned Turtles in Time for Streets of Rage 2, because for that it's just game versus game, whereas this is franchise versus franchise. And it's such an easy comparison because Streets of Rage was created as an answer to Final Fight actually existing. It was such a big hit in the late 80s in the arcades, and later got releases on the SNES, including 2 console exclusive sequels. Now, this is a very, very difficult breakdown, and I thought about this a lot today, and I still don't even think I could come up with an answer that I would be able to keep a week from now. Like, I know what my answer is right this second, but in a week I can completely change my mind. But it's not going to matter because this one's on videotape. Comparing by game,
on VHS. Direct to video.
Rewind the tape. We got to hear him say it again. We need this as evidence. Rewind it. All right, clip that. So, if we're breaking it down specifically by mechanics, or at least like by visuals, I actually prefer Final Fight. As I mentioned before, big sprites, and the sprites in Final Fight are just massive. Like they're your classic Capcom, like take up a third of the screen sprites, but they can do so much with that. There's so much detail to what they do with those characters. The frames of animation, especially in Final Fight Arcade, are just so well put together. Like, especially like watching a character like Cody move, just the frames of animation in his arms is just, I don't know how they coordinated that in 1989. It's silly to even think about. It still looks great today. So visually, yeah, I give the point to Final Fight. Music-wise, it's not even close. Streets of Rage eclipses Final Fight, which has great music. It's a classic Capcom soundtrack style. But Streets of Rage is just on another level when it comes to soundtrack. But we've discussed that at length already today. So past those two things, the gameplay is incredibly even. you always have character in both games across any of the given games in the franchise. You have characters with very diverse movesets and play styles, and you're getting a lot of replayability out of playing any number of them, with the exception of, I guess, Dean in Final Fight 3 on SNES because he sucks. So I had to break it down by the core games, 1, 2, 3. And this is what I use as my tiebreaker because you can't have a tiebreaker with 3 choices. I prefer Final Fights 1 and 3 to their Streets of Rage counterparts, but I actually don't care for Final Fight 2 at all. I've played it extensively. I've beaten it quite a number of times. It doesn't feel good to me. It feels like a rehash of 1 that's not nearly as fun without the tech to it. You know, it doesn't have that spark that gets me want to come back and play it. So 2 easily eclipses that. So for that breakdown, in terms of the franchise in general, I think that Streets of Rage 2 individually is better than any Final Fight game, but I think there are more good Final Fight games than good Streets of Rage games. So my answer is Final Fight.
Okay.
It's not by a great margin, but that is my answer.
His soul was torn trying to answer that question.
It's a hard question when you played them all.
Sometimes it just hurts to have to answer a question on the spot.
It sucks. It's really bad. Man, I'm gonna hate myself next week for whatever answer I don't pick.
All right, so Yellsrake in Discord asked the question, and let's focus on casual for just a second. Yellsrake asked the question, "What's your favorite beat 'em up?"
And we've already answered that, I think.
Which I'm sure LRock is going to be torn with this one as well. Turtles in Time, I don't think is actually my favorite beat 'em up. I've had the most enjoyment historically actually playing Knights of the Round. I've never beaten it. It's way too hard for me. But Knights of the Round, there's something about the setting and the gameplay mixed together that I always just really enjoy playing. Turtles in Time feels like it takes more from me. You know, it's like I have to be really in the mood for Turtles in Time because it's gonna be a workout to play it.
Yeah.
But
mine's Streets of Rage 2, but I think if I were to move past that, I think I would really like Mighty Final Fight if I ever played it. I just haven't played it yet, so I'd probably say like second would be River City Ransom. I love the River City Ransom series, so I had a lot.
River City Ransom's so good.
It's got a lot of charm to it. What about you, LRock?
What's your number one?
Your favorite?
What's your number one?
Simpsons Arcade. I'm sorry, Simpsons Arcade as well, but I've never played that not in the arcade, so I haven't played it since I was a kid. I really want to play it again.
I should say some stuff on that at AGDQ. Yeah. That game's so good. Honestly, favorite. You can look through my resume. I've speedrun so many of these games, but none of them still take my top spot. And the nostalgia just wins out. And that's, as mentioned, Turtles in Time. It's and only the SNES version. The arcade version, horrifically unfair. The music's great, and it has some concepts that have aged well. But the SNES port is just, to me, the complete game.
Yeah.
Character balance aside, it's very much the complete game. I enjoy so much about it. The music is phenomenal. The character sprites are tremendous. They really follow, respect the lore. They follow everything from page to paper or page to screen, whatever you want to call it. They look exactly like they're supposed to. There's no choppiness. To me, prior to playing that game, I had not even played the arcade version of that game, but I played the arcade version of the original, and playing that game on an SNES was like getting the closest thing to getting to play the arcade version at home.
Right.
It looked that good. It sounded that good. It played that well. It was mind blowing for me at the time, and it's still a game that I enjoy playing in 2018.
Speaking of playing the arcade game at home, Mr. Pizak asks, what are your thoughts on beat 'em ups on arcade, MAME versus console? Any key differences that make you gravitate towards one or the other?
That's probably the most loaded question I've seen all day. So let's actually refer back to Streets of Rage 2 real quick. Had a conversation with SM Izumi. He's a high-level Streets of Rage 2 runner. He's from France, and he runs specifically on emulator. There was a day I used to converse with him quite a bit because I was interested in the franchise myself. I remember asking him, why is there a separation of emulator versus original hardware? I see that emulators have faster times. Is there something that causes it to run faster in emulator? Is there just faster transitions between screens? Does it have something to do with input lag or not input lag? Why is it that emulators are faster? Or why are the times in emulators faster? And he said, the real answer is that the majority of players play on emulator. So therefore, by sheer numbers, it's the most optimized, even if it's not necessarily the fastest version. And I was just kind of dumbfounded. I was like, really? So it's just because they didn't play on original hard. Was it a controller thing? Do they not like playing on the Genesis controller? Pointed out earlier. I never got an answer for that. and it still continues to baffle me to this day. I'm like, why?
I mean, the
do more
disparity
people play that?
the disparity playing between like Genesis and a Genesis emulator, I have to imagine, is much smaller than playing on an arcade game, like an actual board for an arcade game, versus playing on MAME or something like that. I mean,
Certainly.
especially for accessibility reasons. I mean, playing on an arcade board, you have to have the
definitely
arcade
not
board set
incorrect.
up with a super gun that's set up with a TV that can accept the input from the super gun. I mean, that's a complicated setup for the average consumer versus MAME. I have to imagine that if you had access to the arcade board, you'd probably prefer to play on the arcade board. But I mean, MAME is just it seems like it's a no-brainer setting up MAME.
Mhm. Right, and that was going to be the next one I was going to get into, because I mean, you can stretch console versus emulator as well as like arcade versus emulator. It goes both ways. But that was just one example I used. Like, so every player is going to react to that differently. If it's console, I prefer original hardware because that's what I've always played. If I'm going to play Batman or if I'm going to play Turtles, like I'm going to play it on an SNES. I don't have any desire to play it on an emulator because I'm used to the timing. Whereas arcade, is there a massive difference in gameplay? Honestly, I can't say for certain because I haven't spent enough time with one versus the other. And as I've pointed out, MAME really just comes down to convenience. Who can honestly have 18,000 arcade boards anywhere?
Sure.
That doesn't happen. You got to have like a business to be able to put that kind of thing together.
Right.
So to have
What about
this
playing
entire
with a
library,
joystick versus playing with a D-pad?
oh my goodness, that I could write theses about. I very much enjoy playing on a fight stick when it comes to beat 'em ups. It's the arcade feel, and
Sure.
anything I play on MAME always goes. Whether I've been, trying to do anything speedrun wise or 1cc wise with Simpsons, any new 1cc's I've picked up like DD Crew or X-Men Arcade or Batman Forever, everything I played is on arcade stick, and I prefer the feel of the lever. It's just simply what it is. Some games that I play on console, I will play on pad because that's just native to it. But that's just how they were designed. Like Turtles in Time SNES was clearly designed to be played on a pad, even though the original arcade, they don't play the same. Batman Returns, exact same thing. It's designed to play on SNES pad, so that's how I'm going to play it. Final Fight 3, moved to the Genesis, Streets of Rage 2, Captain America and the Avengers, anything like that. Like, as far as the differences between them, I mean, I guess it just comes down to convenience. But if we're talking about disparagement, I mean, it's with something like a console, like you can mess around all you want and determine, like, well, I prefer this time into this. Where an arcade, like, how can you really break down the convenience of something like that? I also see there's a bit of a follow-up question. Any console ports I like better than the original version? I'm 100%. I don't prefer the arcade version of that in any sense. I know there's got to be others. That's the one that always sticks out. I actually prefer Double Dragon NES to Double Dragon Arcade, for what that's worth, even though it was a severe downgrade in visuals. Like going from arcade, I guess even the 80s, it was still 16-bit down to like, 8-bit NES was quite a chop. But I still preferred it as a game.
So just to wrap up this Q&A section, we got one last question here from Ash Dragon X, and she asks, I've only played the Game Gear version of Streets of Rage 2. Which version is better, and why is it the Game Gear version?
I've never played the Game Gear version. I know there are speedruns of it, but I've never played it.
I feel like it's probably not better. That's what I'm gonna say.
Yeah,
sorry,
that's my
Ash
guess.
Dragon. But I like you, so we can agree to disagree. So LRock, our dude here, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for bringing your passion and love of beat 'em ups to the podcast. And where can people find you to watch some of these runs? I know there's like a shortage of beat 'em up speedrunners to watch, so all of you all need to go out there and follow our dude LRock right now. Where
I'm going to be that guy. I'm actually going to go ahead. I'm going to say it as well. And type it out there in our friendly neighborhood chat. There we go. Follow me at twitch.tv/LRock67. Been streaming a little under 2 years. And you can also find me on the Forest Stomping Ground for these two lovely gentlemen and Retro Gaming Live TV. I'm still a part of that team, have been. We've got an event coming up I'll do a quick plug myself, on the weekend of December the 8th, called the Coin-Op Classic, which is going to feature myself in addition to many other arcade runners running a variety of things like beat 'em ups, arcade-style side-scrollers, shmups, anything you can put a quarter into, you're probably going to see it that weekend, and it's going to be a huge, huge thing. So,
and you said that was when?
Very much looking forward to that. The weekend of December the 8th. I believe it's a full 3-day event.
Okay.
Awesome, and definitely in line with this whole episode, go check that out on Retro Gaming Live TV, a great channel. Chad, where can they find you? Do all of the beat 'em ups that you are going to do, especially your
Absolutely.
Knights of the Round, 1-player 4-controller speedruns.
Sky's still trying to
three players, can't play 4 players on that.
Sky's still trying to convince me to do co-op with her. That game's so much harder co-op. So you can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube as Author Blues. But where can they find you?
You can find me at John Carls on Twitter and Twitch, John Carls1 on YouTube. Also, thank you so much to all of our supporters out there, everybody watching live on stream, and also those who have donated through patreon.com/theframesavers, where you can support the podcast. We currently have an incentive going on. If we hit $300 a month, me and Chad will both play Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which neither of us have ever played, and do an episode on that. So if you want to support us, help us pay for the hosting fees and editing, all these other things we do, please check that out at patreon.com/theframesavers. Our $25 a month patrons: Tina Hacks, Mr. Pizak, Kip with 2 P's, and Drex DDRREEXX. Thank you so much for being $25 a month patrons. If you want your name read at the end of the podcast, go ahead and give us $25 a month and we will do it. So go check them out. They're all great streamers. Also, shout outs again to our boys at the Warp World podcast. You can find them at podcast.warp.world. As always, thank you so much to Brian Morgenthaler for producing this. You can find him at BMorgs TV on Twitter and Twitch, and you can find links to all of our stuff on theframesavers.com. So if you want your Q&A question read, or you just want to hear about what's coming out and talk to us, go ahead and go to theframesavers.com, and I have a link to our Twitter, links to our Discord, all of that stuff. Any last thoughts about Streets of Rage 2?
Amazing game. Everybody needs to play it. It's like a bucket list game.
Those are my last thoughts. Thank you so much for listening. Go play Streets of Rage 2, and we'll see you later.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.